am Nora, 34 years old, and my life was shattered when a sudden car crash took my husband Ethan from me. Barely a month after burying the love of my life, I forced myself to attend my nephew Leo's first birthday party. I stood in my sister Brenda's backyard surrounded by people eating cake and laughing when she clinked her champagne glass. With a smug smile, she announced to the entire crowd that her son was actually my late husband's child. She slid a forged will across the patio table, demanding half of my $900,000 house as her baby's rightful inheritance. Instead of bursting into tears, I bit back a laugh, handed the paper back, and delivered a response that made the entire room freeze. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who thought they could break you. The bright afternoon sun felt like an insult as I stood on the edge of the manicured lawn. My black morning dress clung to my frame, a stark contrast to the pastel party decorations fluttering in the Chicago breeze. Ethan had been my absolute rock, my partner in everything, and the pain of losing him was a physical weight on my chest. I only came to this party because my mother Patricia had relentlessly guilt-tripped me over the phone, claiming that family must stick together during hard times. I should have known better than to trust her definition of family. Brenda, my older sister by 2 years, had always been the golden child. She thrived on attention, constantly competing with me, while my parents enabled her every whim. I was the scapegoat, the independent corporate strategy consultant who never did things the way they wanted. The backyard was packed with neighbors and distant relatives. I tried to blend into the background, clutching a glass of sparkling water, just waiting for an acceptable time to leave. Then the music abruptly stopped. Brenda stepped onto the raised wooden deck, holding little Leo on her hip. She cleared her throat loudly, tapping a silver spoon against her crystal glass. The chatter died down. Everyone turned to look at her. She wore a perfectly tailored designer sundress, her face arranged into an expression of profound manufactured sorrow. "Thank you all for coming today," Brenda began, her voice carrying across the silent yard. "This past year has been incredibly difficult. As you all know, we recently lost Ethan in a terrible tragedy. He was a good man, but he was also a man who carried a heavy burden." She paused, wiping a completely dry eye. "Ethan and I shared a secret. During a moment of profound weakness and emotional distress, we found comfort in each other. I can no longer hide the truth from my family or from Nora. Leo is Ethan's biological son." The collective gasp from the crowd was deafening. I felt every single eye snap toward me. My heart pounded against my ribs, but my brain completely stalled. Brenda was claiming she slept with my husband. She was claiming her 1-year-old child belonged to Ethan. It was a lie so massive, so utterly detached from reality that I simply stared at her. Before I could even process the words, my mother stepped forward from the crowd. Patricia walked right up to me, her face hard and unsympathetic. "We always knew Ethan wanted a real family, Nora," my mother said loudly, making sure the entire yard could hear her betrayal. "You prioritized your consulting career over giving him a child. You worked 70-hour weeks constantly traveling for your firm, ignoring your duties as a wife. You drove him to this. Ethan just wanted to be a father, and Brenda gave him that gift." My own mother was standing in a backyard full of strangers blaming me for my husband's fictional infidelity. She was weaponizing my successful career, the very career that had paid for her mortgage twice when she was in debt, to justify Brenda's insane lie. The sheer audacity of it left a bitter taste in my mouth. Brenda marched down the steps of the deck and approached me. She reached into her expensive handbag and pulled out a folded legal document. She slammed it down onto the glass patio table right in front of me. "Ethan knew the truth about Leo," Brenda said, her voice dripping with artificial pity. "Before he died, he wanted to make sure his only son was taken care of. He updated his will. This document clearly states that half of the $900,000 house you currently live in belongs to Leo. As his mother, I am claiming his rightful inheritance." I looked down at the paper. It looked official at first glance, complete with legal jargon and a signature at the bottom. The signature looked somewhat like Ethan's handwriting, but the loops were too sharp, the pressure too heavy. It was a forgery, and a clumsy one at that. But beyond the fake signature, there was a much larger, undeniable truth that Brenda knew absolutely nothing about. For 3 agonizing years, Ethan and I had desperately tried to conceive. We had spent countless hours in sterile clinic rooms, crying over negative test results, holding each other in the dark. The final medical verdict had been devastating. Ethan had a severe, irreversible condition. He was completely and entirely sterile. There was zero biological possibility of him ever fathering a child. We had kept this painful secret entirely to ourselves, protecting his dignity from my family's relentless judgmental gossip. Standing there looking at Brenda's smug face and my mother's accusatory glare, the heavy blanket of my grief suddenly gave way to a sharp, icy clarity. They thought they could use my heartbreak to rob me blind. They thought I would crumble under the public humiliation. Instead, a laugh bubbled up in the back of my throat. I pressed my lips together, suppressing the sound, refusing to give them the satisfaction of an emotional breakdown. I picked up the forged will, folded it neatly along the crease, and handed it back to Brenda. I looked her dead in the eye, my voice steady and perfectly calm. "I see. You should probably run this by a doctor first." I turned on my heel and began walking toward the side gate, leaving Brenda standing there with her mouth hanging open. The entire yard erupted into a chaotic symphony of confused whispers and frantic murmurs as I marched away from their toxic circus. The gravel of the driveway crunched loudly under my boots as I walked toward my car. The cool Chicago air hit my face, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of the backyard. I just wanted to get inside my vehicle, lock the doors, and leave this nightmare behind. I reached into my purse for my keys, my fingers brushing against the cold metal when heavy, rapid footsteps sounded behind me. "We are not done here, Nora," a deep, booming voice barked. I turned to see Malik, my brother-in-law, striding aggressively down the driveway, with Brenda rushing closely behind him. Malik was a towering African-American man, heavily built and fiercely intimidating. He wore a custom-tailored burgundy suit that stretched tightly across his broad shoulders, a flashy gold watch gleaming on his wrist. To the outside world, he played the role of a charismatic, wealthy entrepreneur, but I had always seen through his smooth-talking facade. There was a dangerous, volatile edge to him, a coldness in his eyes that made my skin crawl. Before I could pull my car door open, Malik slammed his massive hand flat against the window, physically blocking me from entering. He leaned down, invading my personal space, the overpowering scent of his expensive cologne making me dizzy. "You are not walking away from this," Malik growled, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "That house is half ours now. You need to hand over the keys and sign the deed transfer by Monday. If you cooperate, we can settle this quietly. If you fight us, we will drag your name and Ethan's reputation through the mud in a very messy, very public court battle. You will lose everything." Brenda crossed her arms over her chest, stepping up beside him, her face flushed with anger. "You heard him, Nora. Do not make this harder than it has to be. The will is legally binding. You owe my son that money." I stood my ground, refusing to shrink back from Malik's towering frame. The sheer entitlement radiating from them ignited a fierce fire in my veins. "You actually think you can just intimidate me into giving you my home?" I asked, my voice rising with calculated precision. "Is this going to be just like the time you stole my college fund, Brenda?" Brenda flinched, her eyes darting nervously toward the street. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Do not play stupid," I fired back, stepping closer to her, forcing her to look at me. "When I was 18, you drained my entire savings account to fund your ridiculous failed fashion startup. Patricia and Thomas covered it up for you. They told me I had to take out massive student loans because family helps family, and you needed the money more. You spent my future on designer clothes and luxury vacations, and my parents blamed me for being selfish when I cried about it. You have been stealing from me your entire life, but you are not taking my house." Malik scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Ancient history. We are talking about right now. We have the legal documents. Leo is Ethan's blood. Then let us prove it, I challenged, holding Malik's cold stare. If you are so confident that Leo is Ethan's child, we will do a court-ordered DNA test. I will gladly authorize it. I watched the immediate subtle shift in Malik's demeanor. His jaw clenched tight, and a flash of genuine panic crossed his eyes before he quickly masked it with aggressive outrage. He puffed out his chest, stepping even closer to me. That is absolutely disgusting, Malik spat, pointing a thick finger at my face. You want to dig up your dead husband exhuming a dead man just to satisfy your own bitter jealousy is completely disrespectful to his memory. We are not disturbing his grave for some ridiculous test when we already have his written confession in the will. You are sick, Nora. His deflection was so aggressively rehearsed, so transparently panicked, that it confirmed everything I needed to know. They were terrified of the science because they knew the entire story was a fabricated scam designed to extort me. You do not need to exhume him, Malik, I replied coldly. The hospital has his medical records on file. We can verify everything without ever touching his grave. Brenda opened her mouth to argue, but I did not give her the chance. I shoved my shoulder hard against Malik's arm, forcing him to step back just enough for me to yank my car door open. I slid into the driver's seat, pulled the door shut with a loud slam, and locked it instantly. Through the glass, I saw Malik slam his fist against the roof of my car in frustration, his mouth moving as he shouted something I could not hear over the sound of my engine starting. I threw the car into reverse, backed out of the driveway at a dangerous speed, and peeled down the suburban street, leaving them standing in a cloud of exhaust. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs as I navigated the winding roads back toward the city. The adrenaline from the confrontation began to fade, replaced by a chilling realization. This was not just a greedy sister trying to cause drama. This was a highly calculated, aggressive extortion plot, and they were willing to destroy Ethan's memory to get what they wanted. I pulled onto the highway, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I needed to call my lawyer. I needed to secure my assets. I needed to figure out exactly how I was going to crush them. Suddenly, the sharp, piercing tone of an emergency notification blared through my car speakers. My phone screen lit up on the dashboard mount. It was an alert from my home security application. The bright red text flashed urgently against the dark screen. Motion detected in this master office. Intruder alert. A cold shiver raced down my spine. The master office was where I kept all of Ethan's personal files, his computer, and our financial documents. Brenda and Malik were still at the birthday party, which meant they had sent someone else to my house. Someone was inside my home right now, tearing through my late husband's belongings, looking for something specific. I pressed my foot hard against the gas pedal, racing toward the danger, waiting in the dark. My foot slammed the accelerator against the floorboard. The engine roared as I swerved around a slow-moving delivery truck on the interstate. The notification from my security app glared from the dashboard like a beacon of immediate danger. Someone was in my house. Someone was standing in the exact room where Ethan used to spend hours managing our lives. My knuckles ached from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. The 15-minute drive from my sister's suburban neighborhood back to my own street felt like hours of pure, agonizing panic. I threw my car into park right on the front lawn, ignoring the driveway entirely. The driver's side door flew open before the engine even cut off. I bolted up the brick walkway and stopped dead in my tracks. The heavy oak front door hung awkwardly on its hinges. The wood around the deadbolt was violently splintered, exposing the twisted metal mechanism inside. A cold breeze swept outward from the dark hallway. I stood on the porch, my pulse thundering in my ears. I knew I should call the police and wait outside, but the thought of Brenda or Malik tearing through Ethan's personal memories pushed all logic aside. I pushed the broken door open and stepped inside. The living room looked completely untouched. The expensive television remained mounted on the wall. My designer handbag sat undisturbed on the entryway console. I moved cautiously down the hall, the silence of the house broken only by the sound of my own breathing. I reached the master office at the end of the corridor. The room was completely devastated. Drawers were yanked from the mahogany desk and overturned, sending years of neatly organized paperwork scattering across the hardwood floor. Books were swept off the shelves, their spines cracked and pages crumpled. But the intruder had entirely ignored the silver watch sitting right on the desk. They completely ignored Ethan's expensive gaming laptop sitting wide open on the charging dock. This was absolutely not a robbery. My eyes locked onto the heavy steel filing cabinet in the corner. The top drawer, the one Ethan always kept padlocked, was severely warped. Someone had wedged a heavy crowbar into the gap and violently forced the metal until the lock snapped. Files spilled out like guts from an open wound. Bank statements, old tax returns, and property deeds were tossed around carelessly. They were looking for something specific. Malik had physically threatened me in the driveway just an hour ago, demanding I hand over my home. He knew I would fight back. He knew I would scrutinize that forged will. He sent someone here to find whatever leverage Ethan might have kept hidden in this house. The realization that they were willing to orchestrate a home invasion in broad daylight made my stomach churn with disgust. 2 uniformed police officers arrived 20 minutes after my frantic emergency call. They walked through the house with flashlights, their heavy boots stepping over my scattered memories. The older officer, a man with a graying mustache and a bored expression, scribbled notes on a small pad. "Looks like a standard smash and grab, ma'am," he announced, clicking his pen closed. "Kids in this area know people are usually out enjoying their Saturday afternoons. They break in, grab what they can, and run when the alarm sounds." I pointed an angry finger at the pristine laptop sitting right next to the destroyed filing cabinet. They did not grab anything. A standard burglar does not leave a $2,000 computer sitting in plain sight to break into a locked cabinet full of paper. This was a targeted search. The officer sighed, offering a patronizing smile that made my blood boil. Burglars get spooked easily. The alarm probably went off while they were looking for a safe, and they panicked before they could grab the electronics. We will file a report, but honestly, unless your neighbors have clear security footage, these guys are long gone. They dismissed my concerns entirely. They handed me a generic business card with a case number scrawled on the back and walked out, leaving me alone in the wreckage of my home. I spent the entire night awake, sitting on the floor of the office, meticulously sorting through the scattered documents to determine if anything critical was actually missing. The cold dread creeping up my spine told me this was only the beginning of their assault. The next morning, exhausted and running on zero sleep, I drove to a local coffee shop just to get out of the suffocating mess of my house. I stood at the counter, my eyes burning with fatigue, and ordered a large, dark roast. I handed the barista my debit card. She swiped it, frowned, and swiped it again. "I am sorry, miss," she said softly, handing the plastic card back to me. "It says declined." I frowned, pulling my wallet back open. "That is impossible. Try my primary credit card." I handed her the silver card linked to my consulting business account. She tapped it against the machine. The screen flashed red immediately. "Declined again," she murmured, looking at me with pity. A hot flush of embarrassment crept up my neck as the line of customers behind me shifted impatiently. I grabbed the cards, muttered an apology, and practically ran out to my car. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands shaking as I opened my mobile banking application. Every single account balance displayed a terrifying message in bold letters: "Account frozen." My phone suddenly vibrated in my hand, the screen displaying an incoming call from David, my personal lawyer. I answered it immediately, panic tightening my throat. "Nora, listen to me very carefully," David said, his voice unusually tense, skipping any polite greetings. "I just received an emergency notice from the county clerk. Brenda and Malik did not just forge a will, they hired a highly aggressive litigation firm." "David, my accounts are completely locked," I interrupted, my voice cracking. "I cannot even buy a cup of coffee." "I know," he replied grimly. "They filed an emergency ex parte injunction first thing this morning. They claimed you are a flight risk attempting to liquidate Ethan's estate to deny his supposed biological son his rightful inheritance. The judge granted a temporary freeze on all your financial assets." I gripped the steering wheel, the world spinning around me. "They cannot do that based on a lie." "They just did," David warned, delivering the final crushing blow. "And they placed a formal legal lien on your property. You are completely locked out of your money, and you are forbidden from selling, refinancing, or leveraging your $900,000 house until the paternity dispute is settled in court." "They have trapped you, Nora." The words echoed in the cramped interior of my car. I dropped my phone onto the passenger seat, my chest tightening as the reality of David's warning settled over me. I was completely locked out of my own life. Every dollar I had earned through grueling 80-hour consulting weeks, every cent Ethan and I had saved for our future, was currently sitting behind a digital brick wall. I threw the car into drive and sped directly over to David's downtown law firm. 20 minutes later, I slammed the heavy glass door of David's corner office shut behind me. David sat behind his mahogany desk looking incredibly grim. Spread across his desk were copies of the injunction heavily stamped with the county seal. "How is this even legally possible?" I demanded, pacing the length of his office. Brenda produced a piece of paper she probably printed at a local copy shop. The signature looks like it was drawn with a Sharpie by a toddler. No legitimate judge would grant an emergency financial freeze on a widow based on that garbage. David sighed heavily, slowly rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You are right, Nora. A legitimate judge would never do this. But Malik did not take this to a legitimate judge. He took this to Judge Reynolds." I stopped pacing. "Who is Judge Reynolds?" "He is a county judge with a massive gambling problem and a reputation for fast-tracking injunctions for the right price." David explained, his voice low and serious. "Malik runs a string of supposedly legitimate cash businesses, but the rumors in the legal community point to deep connections with underground betting rings. Reynolds owes Malik favors. That is how they bypassed the standard probate hearing. They filed the injunction under the guise of protecting a vulnerable minor from a flight risk widow. By the time we get a hearing to contest it, they are betting you will run out of money and agree to settle by handing over the house." My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. They had thought of everything. Malik used his corrupt connections to strip me of my resources, leaving me helpless and unable to fight back. Or so they thought. I walked over to David's desk and placed my hands flat on the polished wood, leaning in close. "They made one massive fatal miscalculation, David. They built this entire extortion plot on the premise that Ethan could actually father a child." David looked up, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Nora, fighting paternity after the father is deceased is incredibly difficult. Malik already stated they will refuse exhumation on religious and moral grounds. The court will not force it without probable cause, and Reynolds will block every motion we file to test the child." "We do not need to test the child," I said, a cold, hard smile spreading across my face. "And we do not need to exhume my husband. Ethan was completely 100% sterile." David froze his pen, dropping from his hand. "What did you just say?" "For 3 years, Ethan and I went through hell trying to start a family." I revealed, the painful memories fueling my current rage. "We saw the best fertility specialists in the state. Ethan had a severe, irreversible condition. His sperm count was absolute 0. The doctors told us there was no biological possibility of him ever conceiving a child naturally. We kept it a secret because my parents are ruthless, traditional narcissists who would have viewed him as less of a man and made our lives a living hell. Brenda never knew. Malik never knew. They fabricated this entire illegitimate child story, assuming Ethan was perfectly healthy." David stood up, a spark of triumphant energy suddenly replacing his grim demeanor. "Nora, this changes everything. If we have certified medical records proving absolute sterility from before the child was conceived, it completely destroys their entire case. It proves the will is a fraudulent document designed to facilitate extortion. Judge Reynolds will not be able to ignore certified medical evidence without risking his own career and facing a judicial review. We can blow their injunction out of the water and file countercharges for severe fraud." A wave of fierce vindication rushed through my veins. Brenda thought she had cornered me, but she had blindly walked into a trap of her own making. She was using a child that could not possibly belong to my husband to steal the home Ethan and I built together. "I need those records immediately," David instructed, grabbing his suit jacket from the back of his chair. "A digital chart will not be enough to satisfy the court right now. We need the physical certified file with the doctor's direct signature and the clinic's official seal. Where is the fertility clinic?" "It is across town near the medical district," I replied, already heading for the door. I will drive there right now, get the certified files, and bring them straight back to you. Do not stop for anything, David warned, walking out of the office right behind me. We have a very narrow window to file a motion to quash this injunction before Malik tries to push for a forced property transfer. Get the files. I pulled my car keys from my pocket, my heart hammering with adrenaline and purpose. I finally had the weapon to destroy them. I reached the elevator bank and pressed the down button. As I waited for the doors to open, my phone violently vibrated in my hand. It was not an email. It was a rapid succession of social media notifications pinging one after another in a relentless, terrifying rhythm. I unlocked the screen, my blood suddenly running ice cold. Brenda had launched a massive, highly coordinated public attack. A link to a GoFundMe page glared at me, accompanied by a lengthy, emotionally manipulative Facebook post that already had thousands of shares. The headline read, "Help a grieving mother protect her baby from a greedy barren widow." I clicked the post, my hands trembling as I read the vicious lies Brenda had carefully crafted for the public. She painted herself as the tragic, heartbroken mother of Ethan's secret son, but the worst part was how she described me. She told the world that I was a cold, career-obsessed monster who had known about the baby for months. She claimed I was using high-priced lawyers to freeze the estate, deliberately starving her and my husband's innocent child to keep all the wealth for myself. My own mother had already shared the post, adding a comment about how ashamed she was of her cruel, heartless daughter. The comments section was a war zone of hatred directed entirely at me. Strangers were calling me a monster, demanding justice for Brenda's baby. They were destroying my reputation, isolating me from the community, and setting the stage to make me the ultimate villain before we even stepped foot inside a courtroom. I watched the hateful messages multiply by the second, realizing this was not just a legal battle anymore. It was a vicious, calculated war for my absolute survival. The digital onslaught was relentless. My phone vibrated endlessly against the center console, lighting up with direct messages from people I had known for years. Women from my neighborhood association called me a monster. Former high school classmates told me I deserved to be left with absolutely nothing. Brenda had weaponized the local community with terrifying efficiency, manipulating their sympathies to paint herself as a desperate mother fighting a tyrannical widow. The sheer volume of hatred was suffocating. I threw my phone into the passenger seat and drove back to the suburbs, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my joints ached. Pulling onto my quiet street, the reality of the smear campaign hit me physically. Mrs. Gable, the sweet elderly woman next door, was watering her hydrangeas. When she saw my car approach, she dropped her hose, glared at me with open disgust, and marched straight into her house. I had been branded a pariah in my own neighborhood overnight. I parked in my driveway, completely exhausted, and walked into my silent, ransacked home. The air felt heavy, suffocating under the weight of the betrayal. I barely had time to set my keys on the kitchen counter before loud, aggressive pounding echoed from the front door. The impacts rattled the remaining glass in the side panels. I rushed to the entryway, expecting the police returning with a follow-up report on the break-in. Instead, I found my parents, Thomas and Patricia, standing aggressively on my front porch. Before I could say hello, my mother shoved past me, marching into the foyer with her designer handbag clutched tightly against her chest. My father followed close behind, closing the door and fixing his face into a mask of severe disappointment. Neither of them asked how I was doing. Neither mentioned the splintered wood on the doorframe from yesterday's burglary. They had one priority today, and it had absolutely nothing to do with my well-being. "You need to fix this right now, Nora," Patricia snapped, spinning around to face me. "My phone has not stopped ringing. Brenda is in tears, and half the community is talking about how you are starving a defenseless baby out of spite." "I am locked out of my own bank accounts, Mom," I fired back, my voice echoing in the hallway. "Brenda and Malik filed a fraudulent injunction against me. They forged a will and someone broke in to steal Ethan's documents. I am the victim here." Thomas crossed his arms, looking down his nose at me. "Stop exaggerating to make yourself the center of attention. Brenda showed us the legal paperwork. They simply asked the court to protect Leo's inheritance because you refused to be reasonable. You are making a fool of us." "I refuse to give half of my house to a child that cannot possibly belong to my dead husband," I yelled, the pent-up rage spilling over. Do you have any idea what they are actually doing? They are extorting me. The only one extorting anyone is you, Patricia yelled right back, stepping closer into my personal space. You are holding that poor baby's future hostage because you are bitter. We all know Ethan was unhappy. We all know he desperately wanted a child. You forced him into Brenda's arms because you cared more about your corporate consulting firm than building a real family. You drove him away. Now you have to face the consequences. The absolute cruelty of her words felt like a physical strike to my chest. My own mother was standing in the center of my home, weaponizing a completely fake affair to justify robbing me of everything I owned. Sell the house, Nora, Thomas commanded, using the exact same authoritarian tone he used to punish me when I was a teenager. Put the property on the market this week. Give Brenda her fair share immediately. Then I want you to march over to their house and formally apologize to Malik. If you do exactly as we say, Malik has generously agreed to drop the injunction. You need to do this to save the family's reputation before the gossip destroys my business connections. I stared at the two people who raised me, realizing with absolute clarity that they would gladly watch me burn to the ground if it kept Brenda warm. They were not my parents. They were just Brenda's eager accomplices, perfectly willing to throw me to the wolves. Get out, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, icy calm. Patricia scoffed. Excuse me. I said get out of my house. I repeated, stepping forward and physically forcing them back toward the doorway. I am not selling my home. I am not giving that criminal a single dime, and I will never apologize for defending my husband's legacy. You better start preparing your social circle for the brutal truth, because when I am done exposing what your golden child and her husband have done, the entire family will be disgraced. I shoved them out onto the porch and slammed the front door in their faces, locking the deadbolt with a very satisfying click. My chest heaved as I leaned against the solid wood, listening to Patricia complain loudly before their car finally pulled away and disappeared down the street. I walked straight down the long hall into Ethan's home office to clean up the terrible disaster left by Malik's intruder. I knelt on the floor, gathering the scattered tax returns, bank statements, and loose papers. As I reached far under the heavy mahogany desk to retrieve a crumpled file, my knee pressed hard against the hardwood flooring. The floorboard shifted downward with a strange, hollow click. I paused, pressing my palm firmly against the wood. It was entirely loose. I grabbed a metal letter opener, wedged it deep into the seam, and pried the plank upward. Hidden beneath the floor, perfectly concealed from the intruder's frantic and destructive search, sat a heavy steel lockbox. I wedged my fingers into the tight space between the joists, gripping the cold steel handle of the hidden lockbox. It was heavy, covered in a thin layer of dust that told me it had been concealed down there for quite some time. I hauled it upward, dropping it onto the floorboards with a dull, heavy thud. My hands were shaking, smeared with grime and sweat as I stared at the 4-digit combination dial. Ethan never used standard passwords. He absolutely despised predictable numbers like birthdays or generic anniversaries. I closed my eyes, forcing my panicked brain to think exactly like my husband. What sequence of numbers mattered enough for him to secure his most guarded, dangerous secrets? I reached out and spun the small brass dials. 0, 4, 1, 2, April 12th. The day the fertility clinic gave us the absolute final verdict that he was 100% sterile. The day our lives changed forever. The day he held my hands and promised me we would build a beautiful, fulfilling life with just the two of us. The metal latch clicked open with a sharp snap. I threw the heavy lid back, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I fully expected to find the certified medical file, the clinical documents proving Ethan's sterility, the exact weapon my lawyer David needed to destroy Brenda's fake paternity claim in court. Instead, sitting inside the velvet-lined box was a thick brown manila envelope. It was sealed shut with bright red tamper-evident tape. The bold label printed across the front made my breath catch sharply in my throat. It read, Detective Reed, Private Investigations, Confidential Client Dossier. I ripped the red tape away, tearing the envelope open, and pulled out a stack of papers nearly 2 inches thick. It was not a medical file at all. It was a comprehensive, meticulously documented background investigation. The face staring back at me from the first page of high-resolution surveillance photographs belonged to my brother-in-law. Malik was sitting in a dimly lit booth at a restaurant I did not recognize, handing a thick, unmarked envelope across the table to a man covered in aggressive gang tattoos. I frantically flipped through the pages reading the detailed reports typed up by Detective Reed. The truth hit me like a physical, suffocating blow to the chest. The entire persona Malik presented to our family, the charismatic, successful venture capitalist with the custom burgundy suits and the leased luxury cars, was a complete and utter fabrication. According to the financial traces and surveillance logs, Malik did not own a legitimate tech startup. His registered business was nothing but a hollow shell company used for laundering cash. For the past 4 years, Malik had been operating a massive illicit sports betting and underground gambling ring. The expensive lifestyle Brenda constantly bragged about at family dinners, the lavish tropical vacations, the designer baby clothes for Leo, it was all funded entirely by dirty money. But the money had rapidly run out. I turned to the next section of the dossier explicitly titled Outstanding Liabilities. The numbers printed on the page made my stomach drop to the floor. Malik was not just running an illegal operation, he was spectacularly bad at it. He had borrowed heavily from a violent underground syndicate to cover gambling payouts his ring could not afford. The dossier included copies of intercepted ledger pages and digital communications. Malik currently owed a staggering $2 million to ruthless criminals who did not take kindly to late payments. The report noted that Malik had recently faced severe physical threats, including a documented incident where his luxury sedan was vandalized in a parking garage by known syndicate enforcers. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together in my mind, forming a horrifying picture. Brenda and Malik did not just want my house out of sheer petty greed. They were absolutely desperate. They were facing total financial ruin and violent retaliation. Malik needed an immediate, massive influx of cash to save his own life, and my $900,000 fully paid-off suburban home was the perfect vulnerable target. That was exactly why they forged the will. That was why Brenda invented the disgusting lie about a secret affair with Ethan. That was why they rushed to a corrupt judge to freeze my assets and place a legal lien on my property, trying to force a fast, quiet settlement. They were attempting to use my fresh grief and my parents' toxic favoritism to orchestrate a rapid real estate theft to pay off a deadly blood debt. I sat back on my heels, the thick stack of papers trembling violently in my hands. Ethan knew. My husband had discovered that his brother-in-law was a dangerous, indebted criminal. Ethan had secretly hired Detective Reed to uncover the full truth, likely intending to expose Malik and protect our family from the inevitable criminal fallout. And because Ethan knew someone broke into this office yesterday, trying to find this exact file to destroy the evidence before I could find it, I reached into the bottom of the empty steel box to check if anything else was hidden beneath the dark velvet lining. My fingers brushed against a folded piece of heavy cardstock. I pulled it out and quickly unfolded it. It was a piece of Ethan's personal stationery. The handwriting was hurried, the dark ink slightly smudged, but it was unmistakably my husband's writing. I looked at the date scribbled in the top right corner. It was dated the exact day before the horrific car crash that abruptly took his life. My eyes scanned the short, hastily written lines, and the blood instantly drained from my face. The room seemed to spin, the air growing incredibly thin and cold. I read the words again, my vision blurring with fresh, hot tears, but the terrifying message remained exactly the same. Nora, if you are reading this, I did not make it to the lawyer in time. Malik knows I found out about the syndicate debt. He confronted me in the parking garage today. He is desperate and he is very dangerous. If anything happens to me, do not trust the police report. Check the brakes on my car. A choked sob escaped my throat as the paper slipped from my trembling fingers and fluttered to the floor. Ethan did not die in a tragic, unavoidable accident on a rainy highway. Malik murdered my husband. My hands shook violently as the reality of Ethan's final message sank into my bones. My husband was murdered. The realization did not break me. It forged my suffocating grief into a weapon of pure white-hot rage. I folded the note, shoved it back into the thick manila envelope along with the detective's dossier, and slammed the heavy steel lockbox shut. I had to move immediately. If Malik had sent one intruder to ransack my home, he would absolutely send another to finish the job. I grabbed my car keys and bolted out the back door, leaving the trashed office exactly as it was. I drove 20 miles outside the city limits, keeping a paranoid, hyper-vigilant watch on my rear-view mirror. Every pair of headlights behind me felt like a threat. I finally pulled into the gravel parking lot of a rundown diner tucked off the interstate. A flickering neon sign buzzed overhead as I walked inside, clutching the envelope tightly against my chest. The diner smelled of stale grease and burnt coffee. It was nearly empty, save for a tired waitress behind the counter. I spotted a man sitting alone in a corner booth facing the door. He wore a faded leather jacket and had the hardened, exhausted look of a man who spent his life digging through the darkest parts of other people's lives. I slid into the sticky vinyl booth across from him. "Detective Reed," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. He looked at me, his eyes sharp and calculating. "You found the lockbox. Ethan told me he was hiding my reports under the floorboards." I pushed the heavy envelope across the scratched Formica table. "I read the financial reports. I know about Malik's underground gambling ring. I know about the $2 million debt to the syndicate. And I found this." I slid Ethan's handwritten note toward him. Reed picked up the note, reading Ethan's final warning. A heavy sigh escaped his lips as he set it down on the table. "Ethan hired me 6 months ago," Reed explained, keeping his voice low so the waitress would not hear. "Your sister Brenda could not stop bragging at your family dinners about Malik's massive new investments and their sudden influx of cash. She was flaunting designer bags, driving a brand new leased luxury SUV, and talking loudly about buying a vacation home. Ethan knew Malik's legitimate consulting business was struggling. The math did not add up. He asked me to follow the money. And you found the syndicate," I said, feeling sick to my stomach. "I found a death sentence," Reed corrected grimly. "Malik got in way over his head. He was using a hollow shell company to launder bets, but he started borrowing from the wrong people to cover his massive losses. When the syndicate demanded their money, Malik panicked. Ethan confronted him the day before the crash. He told Malik he was going to the authorities to protect your family from the criminal fallout." I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning stark white. "The police told me Ethan lost control of his car on the wet pavement. They said the vehicle hydroplaned and hit the concrete barrier." Reed leaned forward, his expression hardening into cold stone. "The local police took one look at the heavy rain and wrote it off as a standard traffic fatality. But I did not buy it. The morning after the crash, I used an old badge and a favor to get inside the municipal impound lot before the insurance company hauled the wreckage away to be crushed." My breath caught sharply in my throat. "What did you find?" "The brake lines were not ruptured by the impact of the crash," Reed stated, clearly delivering the crushing, undeniable truth. "They were cleanly, intentionally severed. Someone took a heavy wire cutter to them. Malik knew Ethan drove that treacherous stretch of highway every single night to get home. He sabotaged the car. Malik murdered your husband to stop him from exposing the gambling ring." Tears of absolute fury burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "And now, he is using my sister to steal my house to pay off his murderers." I whispered, the entire sick, twisted plot fully materializing in my mind. Brenda fabricated this ridiculous story about Ethan having an affair. They forged a will naming her baby as the heir. They ran to a corrupt judge to freeze my bank accounts and put a lien on my $900,000 house. They are trying to starve me out financially so I will surrender the property. Reed nodded, taking a sip of his black coffee. "It is the perfect extortion scam. Malik is desperate. The syndicate gave him a deadline, and your fully paid-off house is his only available asset. Brenda is playing the victim on social media to isolate you, ensuring you have no community support to fight back. They are betting on your grief to break you." "They bet on the wrong widow," I hissed, leaning across the table. "I have Ethan's certified medical records proving he was completely sterile for years before Leo was conceived. I can destroy their forged will in court." Reed shook his head, holding up a hand to stop me. Medical records are strong, Nora, but Malik has Judge Reynolds in his pocket. A corrupt judge can delay the verification of those records, order independent medical reviews, and drag this out in probate court for months. You do not have months. Your assets are frozen right now. Malik will escalate his intimidation tactics. If he is willing to cut brake lines, he is willing to hurt you to get that deed. Panic flared hot in my chest. Then what do we do? How do we stop them before they force a settlement? We do not just stop them, Reed said, his eyes narrowing with lethal intent. We destroy their entire narrative so publicly and so absolutely that the corrupt judge has to drop the injunction immediately to save his own skin. We need to legally tie Malik and Brenda to felony fraud, which will blow the lid off the murder investigation. How? I demanded. We need undeniable physical proof that Brenda is lying about the baby, Reed explained, tapping his finger against the table for emphasis. Medical records of sterility can be debated by expensive, dirty lawyers claiming misdiagnosis or frozen sperm samples. But genetics cannot be debated. We need to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Ethan is not the father, which instantly proves the will is a fraudulent instrument used in the commission of extortion. I stared at him, understanding exactly what he was asking me to do. We need Leo's DNA, Reed told me, delivering the impossible objective. And we need to get it without Malik or Brenda knowing. Getting a DNA sample from a heavily guarded 1-year-old child felt entirely impossible. Malik and Brenda had locked down their suburban home, treating Leo like a winning lottery ticket they needed to keep safe until the cash cleared. But desperation breeds creativity. I remembered an email Patricia sent to the entire extended family 2 days ago. She was hosting an exclusive catered support lunch for Brenda at the country club, a ridiculous event designed to rally the community around the poor, victimized mother of Ethan's secret heir. I told Detective Reed to park his unmarked sedan near the valet stand of the country club at precisely 1 o'clock the following afternoon. I was going to walk straight into the lion's den. The oak doors of the private dining room swung open. The polite chatter inside abruptly stopped. Brenda sat at the head of the long mahogany table, bouncing Leo on her lap. Malik stood behind her, a protective hand resting on her shoulder, wearing a sharp charcoal suit. My parents sat flanking them, looking like the proudest grandparents on earth. "What are you doing here, Nora?" Patricia demanded, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. She set her crystal water glass down with a sharp clink. "This is a private gathering for Brenda's support network. You are not welcome." I forced my shoulders to slump. I lowered my gaze, staring at the intricate patterns on the carpet, channeling every ounce of exhaustion I felt into my physical posture. "I came to surrender, Mom," I said, my voice trembling with practiced defeat. "My bank accounts are frozen. The lawyers are demanding retainer fees I cannot pay. I am completely broke and I cannot fight the injunction anymore. I want to negotiate the surrender of the house." The entire room seemed to exhale a collective sigh of victorious relief. Malik's chest puffed out, a greedy, predatory smile spreading across his face. Brenda adjusted Leo on her lap, practically glowing with smug satisfaction. "Well," Patricia said, gesturing vaguely to an empty chair at the far end of the table. "It is about time you finally came to your senses. Sit down, Nora. Do not cause a scene." I pulled out the heavy wooden chair and sat, keeping my head bowed. Malik immediately took charge, leaning over Brenda's chair. "You are making the smart choice, Nora. We will have my lawyer draft the deed transfer by tomorrow morning. You sign the house over to Brenda, and we will ask the judge to lift the freeze on whatever pennies you have left in your checking account." "Thank you," I whispered, digging my fingernails into my thighs under the table to stop myself from screaming. Patricia smiled, turning her attention back to the luncheon guests. "As I was saying before the interruption, we are just so incredibly proud of Brenda's resilience. It takes a remarkable woman to endure such a scandalous betrayal and still put her child first. Ethan made terrible choices, but Brenda is the true victim here. She is the one carrying the burden of his mistakes." I sat there in silence, taking the verbal beatings, while my own mother publicly assassinated my dead husband's character. She praised the woman trying to render me homeless. Patricia had always done this. Whenever Brenda failed out of an extracurricular activity or got caught cheating on a high school exam, Patricia twisted the narrative to make Brenda look like a misunderstood genius. Meanwhile, when I worked double shifts to pay for my own college textbooks because Thomas refused to co-sign my loans, I was called antisocial and obsessive. I swallowed the burning rage in my throat, knowing my current humiliation was the necessary price for their ultimate destruction. Ethan was a deeply flawed man, Brenda added, dabbing the corners of her eyes with a linen napkin. But Leo deserves to know his father provided for him. That house is the only piece of Ethan my son will ever have. The waiter arrived with a tray of appetizers. Malik took the opportunity to slide his suit jacket off his broad shoulders. The dining room was warm, the midday sun beating through the large glass windows. He draped the tailored jacket over the back of an empty chair right next to the buffet station, rolling up his dress shirt sleeves. This was my opening. I waited for the precise moment the waiter poured wine for Thomas, diverting everyone's attention. I stood up, offering a weak, apologetic smile. "I need some water. I will just grab a glass from the station." I walked slowly toward the buffet, passing directly behind Malik's chair. My heart thundered against my ribs loud enough I was certain the entire room could hear it. I brushed my hand casually over the collar of Malik's jacket. The dark fabric made the short, coarse hairs easy to spot. With a quick, practiced motion, I pinched 3 distinct strands from the shoulder seam and slipped them into the small plastic evidence bag tucked inside my palm. One sample secured. Now came the hard part. I poured myself a glass of ice water and turned back toward the table. Leo was getting fussy. The 1-year-old squirmed in Brenda's arms, letting out a sharp, irritated wail. Brenda sighed loudly, clearly annoyed that her prop was interrupting her performance. She grabbed a blue silicone pacifier from the table and shoved it into Leo's mouth. "He is just tired," Brenda complained, bouncing her leg. "He hates these long lunches." I walked closer to her side of the table. "He looks exactly like you, Brenda," I lied smoothly. "Can I say hello to him just for a second? If I'm giving up my home for him, I just want to see him." Brenda rolled her eyes, but the opportunity to gloat over her victory was too tempting to pass up. "Make it quick, Nora. We do not want to upset him." I leaned down, bringing my face level with the child. Leo stared at me with wide, innocent brown eyes. He had absolutely none of Ethan's features. No trace of my husband existed in this boy. The child reached a chubby hand out, grabbing a fistful of my dark hair. As he did, he opened his mouth to babble, and the blue silicone pacifier tumbled out, bouncing off his leg and landing on the carpet right near the edge of my shoe. "Oh, clumsy boy," Brenda muttered, shifting her weight. "I have got it," I said instantly. I dropped to one knee, shielding my actions with my body. I scooped the wet pacifier off the carpet. In the same fluid motion, I pulled an identical brand-new blue pacifier from my blazer pocket, the exact same brand I had purchased at the pharmacy that morning. I swapped them in a fraction of a second, shoving Leo's used pacifier deep into the second plastic evidence bag in my pocket. I stood back up, holding the clean duplicate pacifier out to Brenda. "Here you go. It probably needs to be washed before you give it back to him." Brenda snatched it from my hand with a look of pure disgust. "Obviously. Thank you, Nora. You can go back to your seat now." I retreated to my chair at the far end of the table. My hands shook under the mahogany wood, my palms sweating against the plastic bags hidden in my pockets. I had done it. I had the biological key to completely dismantle their entire criminal enterprise. Malik leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, fixing me with a dominant, terrifying stare. "So we are agreed then. My lawyer will email the documents to your inbox by 5 o'clock today. We expect your digital signature immediately. Once the title transfer clears the county clerk, we will lift the freeze on your checking account so you can afford to move your things into a cheap apartment." I looked at him, absorbing the absolute arrogance radiating from his pores. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he had outsmarted a grieving widow. He had absolutely no idea he was sitting on a ticking time bomb. "I understand," I said softly. "I will look for the email." I stood up, pushing my chair in. The charade had served its purpose, and I could not stomach another second in this room with the people who were actively trying to destroy my life. I am going to leave now, I announced. I need to go pack my things. Good, Patricia said, taking a sip of her Chardonnay. It is the right thing to do, Nora. You are finally acting like a responsible adult. I turned my back on them and walked out of the private dining room. The moment the heavy oak doors shut behind me, the facade of the broken widow vanished instantly. My posture straightened, my jaw locked. I strode through the country club lobby with aggressive, relentless purpose, pushing past wealthy patrons without a second glance. The warm afternoon air hit my face as I exited the main building and scanned the parking lot. Detective Reed's unmarked gray sedan was parked exactly where we had planned, idling near the edge of the valet zone. I marched straight to the passenger side and yanked the door open, dropping into the seat. Reed looked over, raising an eyebrow. Well, did they buy the act? They bought every single second of it. I confirmed, pulling the 2 sealed plastic bags from my pockets. They are too blinded by their own greed and arrogance to see a trap when they are standing right in the middle of it. I dropped the bags onto the center console. The blue pacifier gleamed under the sunlight, coated in the DNA that would shatter their extortion plot. The 3 strands of hair rested in the other bag, ready to expose the truth about Malik's supposed bloodline. Reed picked up the bags, inspecting them carefully. A slow, dangerous smile crossed his face. Perfect. I have a contact at a private forensic lab across the state line. They owe me a massive favor. I can get these samples rushed through the system. We will have the full genetic profiles and comparison results in less than 48 hours. Do whatever it takes, I ordered, staring straight out the windshield toward the country club. Malik expects me to sign away my $900,000 house by 5 o'clock today. I am going to ignore his emails. I am going to let him sweat. Let him think I am stalling out of fear. But the second those test results come back, we are going to drop a nuclear bomb on their perfect little scam today. The 48 hours following the country club luncheon dragged by with agonizing slowness. I locked myself inside my house, ignoring the relentless stream of emails flooding my inbox from Malik's attorney. They sent the digital deed transfer exactly at 5 o'clock, just as promised. The subject line read, "Urgent signature required." I deleted it immediately. Every hour that passed without my signature drove Malik closer to the edge of his sanity. He realized I was not rolling over, so he quickly escalated his tactics from legal pressure to outright psychological warfare. The intimidation started just after midnight. I was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by packed cardboard boxes, to maintain the illusion that I was preparing to move. A pair of heavy headlights suddenly cut through the darkness, washing across my living room wall. I crawled to the window and peeked through the blinds. A massive black SUV was idling at the curb directly in front of my driveway. The engine rumbled with a low, menacing growl. 2 large men sat in the front seats, their faces obscured by the shadows watching my house. They sat there for 3 solid hours. They did not get out. They did not honk the horn. They just sat there, making sure I knew I was being watched, making sure I knew Malik could reach me whenever he wanted. My phone vibrated on the floor. It was a text message from Malik. The message simply read, "Delaying the inevitable only makes it hurt worse. Sign the paper by morning." I stared at the glowing screen. A year ago, a message like that would have sent me into a full panic attack, but fear had completely left my body the moment I realized this man murdered my husband. I locked the screen and tossed the phone onto the sofa. I was not signing anything. Let his syndicate loan sharks breathe down his neck. Let him sweat. The goons outside eventually drove away just before dawn, but the message was clear. I was running out of time before Malik resorted to physical violence. By the second night, the tactics grew bolder. The same black SUV returned, but this time a heavy thud slammed against my front door. I flinched, gripping the baseball bat I had taken from Ethan's closet. I crept into the hallway and checked the security camera feed on my tablet. One of the men was standing on my porch, grinning directly into the camera lens. He raised a hand, pointing 2 fingers at the lens like a gun, mimicking a recoil before turning and walking casually back to his vehicle. My parents called this next morning, leaving angry voicemails demanding to know why I was dragging my feet and jeopardizing the family reputation. Patricia screamed into the phone that Brenda was having panic attacks because of my selfishness. I deleted the voicemails without listening to the end. They were so thoroughly brainwashed by Brenda's victim act that they could not see the monsters standing right next to them. I drank my black coffee, ignoring the exhaustion burning in my eyes, and waited for the only call that actually mattered. At precisely 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed Detective Reed's secure number. "I have the lab reports," Reed stated, his voice tight and urgent. "You need to get down to my office right now. Make sure you are not being followed." I grabbed my keys and slipped out the back door, cutting through my neighbor's yard to reach the secondary street where I had parked my car to avoid the thugs out front. I drove through the city using a convoluted route, constantly checking my mirrors to ensure the black SUV was not tailing me. I finally arrived at Reed's office, located above a noisy auto repair shop in an industrial district. It was gritty, secure, and completely off Malik's radar. I pushed the heavy metal door open. Reed was sitting behind a cluttered metal desk. Two crisp white folders sat precisely in the center of the desk, under the harsh glare of a fluorescent desk lamp. Reed looked up as I locked the door behind me. His usual stoic, unbothered expression was gone. He looked genuinely rattled. "Tell me we have it," I demanded, walking straight to the desk. "Tell me we have the absolute proof I need to tear their fake will to shreds and force the judge to drop the injunction." Reed picked up the first folder and slid it across the metal desk toward me. The lab rushed the comparison against the residual DNA profile we pulled from Ethan's medical records. Just as we knew, the saliva from the pacifier does not match. Leo is a 0% match to Ethan. There is absolutely no biological relation. The paternity claim is a complete and utter fabrication. A heavy breath escaped my lungs. The relief was intoxicating. I finally had the indisputable scientific weapon to clear Ethan's name and destroy the extortion plot. "Perfect," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "I am going to hand this directly to David. We will file it with the court tomorrow morning. Malik and Brenda are going to face felony fraud charges before the week is over." Reed did not smile back. He did not look relieved. He picked up the second white folder, his fingers gripping the cardboard tightly. "Nora, sit down," Reed commanded softly. My smile faded instantly. "Why, we have what we need. We proved Ethan is not the father." "We did," Reed agreed, leaning forward and placing the second folder directly in front of me. "But I had the lab run a secondary test. We needed to formally establish Malik as the biological father to complete the fraud narrative for the prosecutor. I had them run the hair follicles we pulled from his custom suit jacket against the DNA on the pacifier." I pulled the chair out and sat down, my heart beginning to race with sudden, unexplained anxiety. "Okay, and it just proves Malik and Brenda are trying to pass their own kid off as Ethan's to steal my assets." "No, Nora," Reed said, tapping a heavy finger against the closed folder. "It does not." I stared at him, my brain struggling to process his words. "What do you mean?" Reed opened the folder and turned the lab report so I could read the bold black text printed across the bottom of the page. "The hair from the jacket is a 0% match to the child," Reed revealed, delivering a bombshell that completely knocked the wind out of my lungs. "Malik is not the father. Brenda has been playing her own twisted game this entire time. The baby belongs to someone else entirely." The air in Reed's office grew incredibly heavy. I stared at the laboratory report, trying to make the impossible words form a logical sentence in my mind. Brenda was not just an accomplice to Malik's extortion. She was running a massive, treacherous con on her own husband. "Who is the father?" I demanded, my voice shaking with adrenaline and shock. "If Malik thinks this is his child and Brenda tried to pin the paternity on Ethan to steal my house, whose baby is she carrying?" Reed pulled a third file from his desk drawer. "When I saw the negative DNA result for Malik, I knew I had to dig deeper into your sister's movements. I bypassed her standard financial records and pulled the geolocation data from her vehicle's navigation system over the past 2 years. Malik thought Brenda was attending high-end charity luncheons and spa days. The GPS data told a very different story." Reed slid a grainy surveillance photograph across the metal desk. It showed Brenda slipping out the side door of a run-down cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. She was wearing a large trench coat and dark sunglasses, desperately trying to hide her identity. A man was walking out right behind her. He was tall, heavily tattooed, and possessed a ruthless, predatory stance. "That is Tyrone," Reed stated, tapping a pen against the photograph. "He is a high-ranking enforcer and debt collector for the exact underground syndicate Malik owes $2 million to. Tyrone is the man who vandalized Malik's luxury car in that parking garage. He is the one who has been threatening your brother-in-law's life." My jaw practically unhinged. The sheer audacity of Brenda's betrayal was staggering. She was sleeping with her husband's violent loan shark. She was doing a lot more than just sleeping with him. Reed corrected, his eyes dark with serious implications. Malik was drowning in debt. The syndicate was closing in, and Malik's life was on the line. Brenda knew they were about to lose their suburban mansion, their luxury cars, and their fake social status. She met with Tyrone behind Malik's back, offering herself to negotiate an extension on the debt. She bought her husband time, but she got careless. She got pregnant. I fell back against my chair, the pieces of this horrifying puzzle finally clicking into place perfectly. Brenda must have panicked when she realized she was pregnant with a ruthless loan shark's baby. She convinced Malik the child was his. But the debt still loomed over their heads, a ticking time bomb waiting to destroy them. When Ethan died, Brenda saw the perfect opportunity. She convinced Malik to forge a will and pin the baby on my dead husband, creating a false narrative that would allow them to steal my fully paid-off $900,000 home. They could sell my property, pay off Tyrone, and walk away clean. Malik had absolutely no idea his wife was a traitor. He had no idea his supposed heir was actually the biological child of the very criminal hunting him down. He thought he was extorting a grieving widow to save his family. In reality, Brenda was using him as a pawn to clean up her own disgusting, treacherous mess. I looked down at the DNA reports resting on the desk. I was holding a nuclear bomb in my hands. This piece of paper would not just clear Ethan's name and lift the fraudulent injunction on my bank accounts. This single sheet of paper would entirely annihilate their marriage. It would turn Malik's violent, murderous rage directly onto Brenda. Their extortion scheme was going to burn them both to the ground. "We have everything we need," I told Reed, carefully gathering the documents and sliding them securely into my leather bag. "I am going to let them walk right into their own execution. I want them to feel every single second of the fallout." I left Reed's office and drove back to my dark, silent house. The street was quiet, the aggressive black SUV nowhere to be seen. Malik assumed his tactics had worked, and I was sobbing in the dark, preparing to surrender my property. I walked into my kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and began outlining the final steps of my counterattack. I needed to lure them into a legally binding setting. I needed my lawyer David to set up a formal deposition to end the paternity dispute on the official record. I would trap them under oath, surrounded by court reporters, and drop the medical and DNA evidence right in their laps. I placed my glass in the sink, my mind racing with strategies. The house was dead quiet. The clock on the microwave glowed bright green, indicating it was well past 2 in the morning. I turned toward the hallway when an explosive crash shattered the silence. Wood splintered violently. The heavy deadbolt on my back door ripped completely out of the doorframe. The door flew inward, slamming brutally against the drywall. I screamed, jumping back against the kitchen counter. The cold night air rushed into the room, followed immediately by a massive, terrifying figure. Malik stepped through the shattered doorway. He was not wearing his usual custom-tailored suit. He wore dark jeans and a black hooded sweatshirt, his eyes wide with a manic, unhinged desperation. His massive chest heaved as he locked eyes with me. He kicked the broken door shut behind him, trapping me entirely inside the kitchen. There was no escape route. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick stack of folded legal papers, throwing them violently onto my kitchen island. The deadline was 5 o'clock. Malik growled, his voice a low, lethal rumble that vibrated against the tile walls. "I am done playing games with you, Nora. You are going to sign the deed transfer to this house right now, or I swear to God you are not leaving this kitchen alive." The broken wood crunched loudly under Malik's heavy boots as he took another step into my kitchen. He did not look like the polished, charismatic brother-in-law who charmed his way into my family. The expensive suits and the bright, easy smile were completely gone. Right now, in the dim light of the microwave clock, he looked exactly like what he truly was. He was a violent, desperate criminal, backed into a corner by a $2 million blood debt. I pressed my spine hard against the edge of the granite kitchen island. My hands gripped the cold stone behind me. The shattered remains of my back door lay scattered across the tile floor, letting the freezing night wind whip through the room. "I am not playing games, Nora." Malik repeated his voice, dropping to a terrifying guttural whisper. He stepped closer, closing the distance between us, until I could feel the heat radiating from his massive chest. He reached out and slammed both of his hands flat onto the granite counter, trapping me entirely between his thick, muscular arms. I was caged. If I tried to run left or right, he would catch me instantly. "You think you are so smart?" Malik sneered, leaning his face down until his nose was mere inches from mine. "You think you can just ignore my lawyer and delay this process. But you do not understand the stakes here. I need this property transferred by tomorrow morning, and I will do absolutely whatever it takes to make that happen. You cannot force me to sign away my home." I shot back, forcing my voice to tremble just enough to sound terrified. "The judge will see right through this. My parents will realize what you are doing." Malik threw his head back and let out a harsh barking laugh. The sound bounced off the kitchen cabinets, cruel and completely unhinged. "Your parents," he mocked, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. "Thomas and Patricia are the easiest marks I have ever played in my entire life. They are so incredibly desperate to maintain their perfect suburban image, so utterly obsessed with protecting Brenda, that they will swallow any lie I feed them. I told them you were having a mental breakdown. I told them you were plotting to steal the baby's rightful inheritance out of pure, bitter jealousy. And do you know what your father said? He thanked me for stepping up to handle the legal mess. He practically begged me to take everything from you to protect their precious golden child." I shrank back against the granite, letting a deliberate tear slip down my cheek. "They are my family. They will eventually see the truth." "They do not care about the truth." Malik spat his breath hot against my face. "They only care about what the neighbors think. And right now the neighbors think you are a monster. You have absolutely no one left to protect you, Nora. You are completely isolated, just like Ethan was." My breath caught in my throat. I stared up at him, letting my eyes widen with manufactured horror. Malik leaned in even closer, his dark eyes locking onto mine with lethal, predatory intent. He lowered his voice, making sure every single word carried the heavy, unmistakable weight of a death threat. "Ethan thought he was a hero," Malik whispered, a sickening smile curling the corners of his mouth. "He found out about my business. He found out about the money I owed the syndicate. He actually looked me in the eye in a parking garage and told me he was going to the police to turn me in. He thought he could protect your family from me." Malik tilted his head, his eyes gleaming with pure malice. "But cars are very complicated machines, Nora. They require constant maintenance. If a person is not careful, things can break down at the worst possible moments. A steep hill, a sharp curve, a heavy rainstorm. If the brake lines happen to fail when a driver really needs them to work well, that is just a tragic, unavoidable accident. The police wrap it up in a neat little bow, the widow cries at the funeral, and the problem goes away permanently." A cold, sharp shiver ripped through my entire body. I did not have to fake the physical reaction. Hearing the man standing in front of me openly confess to murdering my husband made my stomach violently churn. But I knew exactly how to use his arrogant confession to my advantage. I let my knees buckle just a little, sliding slightly down the edge of the kitchen island. "You killed him," I whimpered, letting my voice crack with sheer, unadulterated terror. "You actually killed Ethan." "I removed an obstacle," Malik corrected coldly. "And right now you are standing in my way, acting like an obstacle." "You see, grief is a very heavy burden, Nora. It makes people do crazy things. Widows have a very high mortality rate. Sometimes they get so depressed they mix the wrong prescription pills with a bottle of wine. Sometimes they get so dizzy from crying they accidentally trip and fall head first down their own basement stairs, snapping their necks in the dark." It would be an absolute tragedy if another fatal accident happened to this family so soon after Ethan's funeral. I let out a loud, pathetic sob. I collapsed entirely, sliding down the smooth granite cabinets until I hit the cold tile floor. I pulled my knees up to my chest, wrapping my arms around my legs, and buried my face in my hands. I began to hyperventilate, forcing my shoulders to shake violently as I cried. "Please," I begged, my voice muffled by my hands. "Please, Malik. Just leave me alone. Please do not hurt me. I cannot take this anymore." Malik looked down at me, his face twisting with absolute disgust. He saw a broken, defeated woman cowering on the floor, completely shattered by his intimidation. "I will sign the papers." I sobbed loudly, looking up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. "I will give Brenda the house. I will give you everything you want. Just please, please do not kill me. Let me pack a bag and leave the city. I will disappear. Just let me live." Malik chuckled, a deep, satisfied sound of pure victory. He reached inside his black hooded sweatshirt and pulled out the thick stack of legal documents. He threw them aggressively onto the kitchen floor. The heavy papers slapped against the tiles, landing right next to my trembling hands. "I knew you would finally listen to reason," Malik said, stepping over the shattered remains of my back door. "Sign the deed transfer tonight. Have the digital copy emailed to my lawyer by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. If I do not see that email sitting in his inbox when I wake up, I am coming back here to finish this conversation. And next time I will not be doing any talking." He turned his back on me and walked out into the freezing night air. I stayed huddled on the kitchen floor, forcing myself to continue sobbing loudly, just in case he was lingering in the backyard listening to me. I heard his heavy boots crunch across the gravel driveway. I heard the deep rumble of his car engine starting, followed by the screech of tires as he sped away down the dark suburban street. The sound of the engine faded entirely into the distance, leaving the house dead quiet. The moment the street fell completely silent, my tears stopped instantly. The terrified, broken widow routine vanished from my body like a discarded coat. My posture straightened. The trembling in my hands ceased entirely. My face went ice cold, locking into a mask of pure, calculated determination. I calmly reached a steady hand into the deep pocket of my thick wool cardigan. My fingers brushed against the small rectangular shape of the digital audio recorder I had purchased from an electronics store 3 days ago. I pressed my thumb firmly against the stop button. A tiny red light on the device blinked twice and turned off, confirming the file was securely saved to the internal memory drive. I pulled the recorder out of my pocket and stared at the small digital screen. I now held an immaculate high-definition audio file of Malik openly bragging about manipulating my parents. I had a crystal-clear recording of him threatening my life, and most importantly, I had a direct, unquestionable confession of him admitting he sabotaged Ethan's brake lines. Malik thought he had just terrified a weak, defenseless woman into surrendering her entire life savings. He had absolutely no idea. He had just handed me the final lethal weapon I needed to lock him inside a federal prison cell for the rest of his natural life. I slipped the digital recorder deep into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the cold plastic casing. The kitchen was freezing, the wind howling through the shattered back door Malik had kicked off its hinges. Instead of dialing emergency services, I grabbed the heavy oak dining table by the legs and dragged it across the tile floor, barricading the broken entryway. Calling the police right now for a simple home invasion would only spook Malik. A brief interview with uniformed cops would give him time to lawyer up, destroy evidence, and prepare a defense. I did not want him cautious. I needed him arrogant, greedy, and completely convinced that he had won. I sat on the edge of the kitchen counter, pulled out my phone, and dialed David's personal cell number. He answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Nora, it is 3 in the morning," David mumbled. "Are you all right?" "Wake up, David," I instructed, my voice sharp and entirely devoid of fear. "Malik just broke into my house. He threatened to kill me and he openly bragged about sabotaging Ethan's car. I have the entire conversation recorded in high-definition audio. We have his complete confession to premeditated murder and extortion." I heard the sound of rustling sheets as David sat up rapidly, suddenly wide awake. Are you in a safe location? We need to contact the authorities immediately. No, I fired back instantly. If we go to the police now, Malik gets arrested for the break-in, but Brenda will still try to claim the estate using that fake will. I want to obliterate their entire extortion plot, clear Ethan's name, and send Malik to prison all at the exact same time. First thing tomorrow morning, I want you to call Brenda's attorney. Tell them the intimidation worked. Tell them I am absolutely terrified, I am completely broke, and I am ready to surrender the house to settle the paternity dispute. David paused, catching on to the strategy perfectly. You want to trap them on the official record. Exactly, I confirmed. Demand a formal sworn deposition. Tell their lawyer I will sign the deed transfer and hand over the keys, but I insist on doing it in a conference room with a court reporter present to ensure Malik can never come after me again. Let them think they are getting exactly what they want. I will draft the email immediately, David promised, the excitement clear in his tone. They will take the bait. By noon the next day, the trap was officially set. Brenda's sleazy attorney had practically jumped at the offer, scheduling the deposition for the very next morning at his downtown office. Malik was undoubtedly gloating, believing his late-night terror tactics had broken the stubborn widow. I was sitting at my kitchen island, organizing the explosive evidence Detective Reed had given me, when my phone screen lit up with an incoming call from Patricia. I took a deep, steadying breath, forced my vocal cords to relax, and answered the phone. Well, it took you long enough to act like a mature adult, Patricia announced immediately. She did not bother asking how I was doing. Brenda called us this morning in tears of relief. You are finally doing the right thing for this family. I just want this to be over, I replied, keeping my voice low, injecting a slight tremble into my words to sell the performance of a defeated woman. Thomas grabbed the phone from my mother, his booming voice echoing through the speaker. You caused a completely unnecessary scene at the birthday party, Nora. You dragged this out and embarrassed everyone. Handing the house over to the rightful heir is the absolute bare minimum you can do to make amends. We are thoroughly disappointed in how you handled Ethan's mistakes, but at least you are finally showing some accountability. I gripped the edge of the granite counter, my fingernails digging into the stone. They were actively praising me for surrendering my own home to a fraudulent toddler. Your mother and I will be attending the deposition tomorrow morning, Thomas declared arrogantly. We are going to be there to support Brenda during this highly emotional transition. We also want to ensure you do not try any last-minute tricks. You will sign those papers, hand over the keys, and apologize to Malik for your horrific behavior. A cold, dangerous smile spread across my face. They wanted front-row seats. They wanted to sit in that conference room and watch me lose everything. I could not have asked for a more perfect scenario. I understand, I said softly, masking the venom boiling in my veins. I will see you both tomorrow. I hung up the phone, the smile remaining fixed on my lips. They were all going to be locked in the same room. The corrupt brother-in-law, the treacherous sister, and the narcissistic parents who enabled them. When the sun rose the next morning, I did not dress like a grieving broken widow. I walked into my closet and pulled out my sharpest, most intimidating charcoal business suit. I secured my hair into a tight professional knot at the base of my neck. I applied my makeup with meticulous precision, highlighting the sharp angles of my cheekbones. I looked exactly like the ruthless corporate strategy consultant my parents always despised. I was walking into a war zone, and I was armed to the teeth. I drove downtown, pulling into the underground parking garage of the opposing law firm. David was waiting for me in the sleek marble lobby, holding a sleek leather briefcase. He looked nervous, but entirely ready for the bloodbath ahead. I walked up to him, my heels clicking sharply against the polished stone floor. I unzipped my designer tote bag and pulled out 3 thick, heavy manila envelopes. I handed them over to my lawyer one by one. The first envelope contained Ethan's certified medical records proving absolute, irreversible sterility. The second envelope held the DNA test proving Brenda slept with Tyrone, the violent loan shark. The third envelope contained Detective Reed's financial dossier and a silver flash drive holding the crystal-clear audio recording of Malik confessing to Ethan's murder. David took the envelopes, feeling the heavy weight of the destruction resting in his hands. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with anticipation. "Let us burn them to the ground," I said. The heavy mahogany doors of the glass-walled conference room swung open with a muted click. The space inside felt entirely hostile, a fishbowl of corporate luxury overlooking the concrete skyline of downtown Chicago. I strode in my heels, striking the polished floor, with a steady, unyielding rhythm followed closely by David. Sitting on the opposing side of the long table was the entire circus. Brenda sat in the center, her face immaculately made up, wearing a soft pastel blue blouse, designed to make her look like a vulnerable, grieving mother. Malik stood directly behind her high-backed leather chair, his massive arms crossed tightly over his chest. His custom-tailored charcoal suit was pristine, and a heavy ring glinted on his finger under the bright LED lights. He fixed me with a dominant, predatory smirk, his dark eyes radiating the absolute certainty of a man who believed he had successfully terrified his target into complete submission. Flanking the golden couple were Thomas and Patricia. My parents sat rigidly, their faces frozen into identical masks of severe, self-righteous disapproval. They looked at my sharp business suit and my tightly braided hair, their eyes narrowing as if my refusal to look broken was a personal insult to them. At the head of the table sat their attorney, a slick-backed man named Mr. Pierce, who was busy organizing a stack of legal documents with practiced arrogance. In the corner of the room, a professional court reporter adjusted her machine, her fingers poised over the keys ready to record every single syllable under official oath. David and I took our seats directly across from them. The wide table felt like a physical chasm separating completely different worlds. I placed my leather bag on the floor, folded my hands on the table, and met Malik's gaze with absolute icy stillness. His smile widened slightly, interpreting my silence as the mute shock of a defeated woman. Mr. Pierce cleared his throat loudly, leaning forward to adjust the microphone in front of him. "For the record, this is the formal deposition regarding the estate of the late Ethan Henderson and the pending paternity dispute filed on behalf of minor child Leo. We are gathered here to finalize the voluntary settlement and asset distribution as outlined by the parties." He turned his eyes toward me, his arrogant tone dripping with smug satisfaction. "Since the defendant Nora has requested this meeting to settle the matter out of court, I will now read the explicit terms of the settlement agreement." He picked up a thick stack of papers and began reading the brutal, humiliating terms in a clinical robotic drone. Every single word was a deliberate stab designed to strip away my remaining dignity. Article 1. Mr. Pierce read, his voice echoing in the silent room. "The defendant Nora agrees to full and unconditional surrender of the residential property located at 92 Laurel Drive, valued at approximately $900,000. The title deed and all physical keys will be transferred immediately to Brenda as the legal guardian of Ethan's biological son, Leo." Article 2. The defendant formally withdraws all legal challenges against the validity of the last will and testament presented by Brenda. Article 3. The defendant signs a formal public admission acknowledging that her late husband Ethan was the biological father of Leo, thereby settling all future probate claims. Mr. Pierce paused, looking over the top of his reading glasses to ensure I was absorbing the full weight of the loss. Malik leaned forward slightly, resting his large hands on the back of Brenda's chair, looming over the table like a predator preparing to feast. "And finally, Article 4. Mr. Pierce continued, a malicious glint in his eyes. "The defendant will issue a formal written apology to Brenda and Malik for her disruptive behavior, false accusations, and malicious attempts to deny a vulnerable child his rightful inheritance. Upon the successful digital signature of these 4 articles, the plaintiff agrees to petition the court to lift the emergency financial injunction restoring the defendant's access to her frozen personal bank accounts." The moment he finished reading, Patricia let out a loud theatrical sigh of relief. She leaned across the table, fixing me with a stern, reprimanding glare. "It is about time you swallowed your ridiculous pride, Nora." my mother said, her voice dripping with venom. You have dragged this family's name through the mud for weeks with your stubbornness. Ethan made his mistakes because you neglected him, but Brenda is the one who did the real work of carrying his legacy. Signing these papers is the absolute bare minimum you can do to make amends for the shame you brought upon this family. Thomas nodded in agreement, slamming his hand lightly on the table. Your mother is right. Malik and Brenda have been incredibly generous to offer you this way out. You should be thanking them for not pursuing full legal damages for the slanderous comments you made at the birthday party. Sign the deed, hand over the keys, and let us put this horrific embarrassment behind us. Brenda took her cue perfectly. She lowered her head, pulling a lace handkerchief from her pocket, and began to shed completely fake calculated tears for the record. I never wanted it to come to this, Nora, she whimpered, her voice trembling with simulated heartbreak. But Ethan loved me. He found comfort in my arms because you were always too cold, too career-driven, too obsessed with your consulting firm to give him the family he desperately craved. Leo is the only piece of him I have left. He wanted his son to have that house. You cannot keep punishing an innocent baby just because Ethan chose me over you. I sat perfectly still, absorbing their vicious, coordinated psychological assault without moving a single muscle in my face. I watched Brenda perform, watched my parents enable her, and watched Malik gloat in the shadows. They truly believed they had completely destroyed me. They had absolutely no idea they were sitting in a locked room with a firing squad. David turned on his microphone. The sharp click silenced the room instantly. He adjusted his glasses, looked directly at Brenda, and leaned toward his legal pad. Before my client signs any settlement documents or surrenders any real estate assets, we require a few clarifications for the official record. David announced, his voice smooth, professional, and completely devoid of fear. He looked at the court reporter, ensuring her machine was recording. Brenda, you are currently under penalty of perjury. I need you to confirm explicitly and for the record that you engaged in a continuous physical affair with the deceased Ethan, which directly resulted in the conception and birth of your son Leo. Do you state under oath that Ethan is the absolute biological father of your child? Brenda straightened in her chair, brushing her hair back, her face locking into an expression of supreme, unshakable confidence. She looked directly into the camera recording the deposition and smirked. Yes, absolutely, Brenda stated loudly and clearly. Ethan is the father of my son, and I swear to that under oath. I looked at her, a cold, lethal smile finally breaking across my face. I reached into my leather bag, pulled out the first thick manila envelope, and slid it smoothly across the polished table. The thick manila envelope glided across the polished mahogany surface, stopping perfectly right in front of Mr. Pierce. The arrogant smirk on the opposing lawyer's face faltered slightly. He glanced down at the sealed flap, then looked up at David with a mix of annoyance and sudden apprehension. What is this? Mr. Pierce demanded, refusing to touch the package. David leaned forward. That is Defendant's Exhibit A. David stated clearly, ensuring the court reporter caught every syllable. I suggest you open it, counselor, or I can read the certified contents aloud for the official record. Mr. Pierce hesitated, shooting a quick, nervous glance at Malik. Malik gave a short, dismissive nod. Mr. Pierce picked up a silver letter opener and sliced through the heavy paper. He pulled out a thick stack of medical documents, the top page bearing the official embossed seal of the premier fertility clinic in the state. I watched Mr. Pierce's eyes scan the first few lines. The color instantly drained from his face. His mouth parted slightly and his hands began to tremble. He quickly flipped to the second page, then the third, his professional composure completely unraveling. Well, Malik barked, shifting his massive weight behind Brenda's chair. What does it say? Stop wasting our time. Mr. Pierce swallowed hard, looking at Brenda with sheer panic in his eyes. He remained completely silent. Since opposing counsel seems to have lost his voice, I will gladly read it for the record, David announced. He opened his own duplicate copy of the file. Defendant's Exhibit A, consists of the certified, verified medical records of the late Ethan Henderson. The documents confirm that 5 years ago, Ethan underwent a permanent, irreversible vasectomy. Furthermore, subsequent medical testing conducted 3 years ago confirmed absolute complete sterility. His sperm count was 0. The attending physician noted there was zero biological possibility of him ever conceiving a child naturally. The conference room plunged into a suffocating dead silence. The only sound was the rapid rhythmic clicking of the court reporter typing every single devastating word into the official transcript. Patricia let out a sharp gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Thomas stared at David, his brow furrowed in utter confusion. He turned his head slowly to look at his golden child. Brenda, what is he talking about? You said Ethan was the father. Brenda looked like all the air had been violently sucked out of her lungs. Her face was chalk white. She stared at the medical documents resting on the table as if they were venomous snakes. Malik leaned down, snatching the papers right out of his lawyer's hands. He read the clinical diagnosis himself, his dark eyes scanning the unarguable medical proof that destroyed their entire extortion scheme. This is fake, Malik growled, throwing the papers back onto the table. She forged this. It carries the certified seal of the State Medical Board, Malik. I replied, my voice slicing through the room like a frozen blade. It is signed by the Chief of Reproductive Medicine. Ethan was entirely sterile long before you two even bought your house. He could not possibly be the father of your child. Your entire lawsuit is based on a biological impossibility. Brenda started shaking. Her chest heaved as she frantically searched for a way out of the trap she had just willingly walked into. She looked at the court reporter, realizing with sheer horror that she had just sworn under penalty of perjury that she had a physical affair that resulted in Leo's birth. He froze it. Brenda suddenly blurted out, her voice pitching into a shrill, desperate shriek. Ethan knew he was getting the vasectomy. He froze his sperm beforehand. We went to a clinic together. We used a private facility to conceive Leo. Mr. Pierce closed his eyes and buried his face in his hands. He knew exactly what she was doing. She was actively committing perjury on a recorded legal transcript, destroying any shred of credibility she had left. Are you stating under oath that you and Ethan utilized a cryobank and a fertility clinic to conceive your son via artificial insemination? David asked, his tone deceptively mild, giving her enough rope to hang herself twice. Yes, Brenda cried out, leaning forward, tears of pure panic spilling down her cheeks. Yes, we did. He wanted it kept secret. We used a clinic downtown. That is how it happened. I let out a harsh, unforgiving laugh. I reached into my bag and pulled out a second stack of papers, tossing them directly across the table. Do not bother naming a clinic, Brenda. I warned her, watching her entire world burn to the ground, because I already checked them all. Those are sworn affidavits from the legal departments of every single licensed fertility clinic, cryobank, and reproductive storage facility in this state and the 3 surrounding states. Each one confirms that Ethan never banked genetic material at their facilities. There is no frozen sperm. There was no secret procedure. You just committed felony perjury on an official legal record. Brenda collapsed back into her heavy leather chair, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Patricia grabbed her daughter's arm, her voice rising in hysterics. Brenda, tell them they are wrong. Tell me you did not lie about this. We dragged Nora through the mud for you. Thomas looked sick to his stomach. The perfect suburban reputation he valued above all else was completely disintegrating. He realized in real time that he had helped his favorite daughter try to render a grieving widow homeless over a spectacular criminal lie. Shut up! Malik roared, his voice shaking the glass walls of the conference room. Malik slammed his massive fist down on the mahogany table with such explosive, violent force that the heavy water pitchers rattled, spilling ice onto the polished wood. His face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The $2 million syndicate debt was hanging right over his head, and the $900,000 house he desperately needed to steal was officially out of his grasp. He pointed a thick, shaking finger directly at my face, dropping all pretense of being a civilized businessman. "You think this changes anything?" Malik bellowed, his chest heaving with aggressive, volatile energy. "You dragged us in here to humiliate my wife. You have caused catastrophic emotional distress to my family. We are still holding the injunction on your bank accounts. You are going to pay us for the psychological damage you caused today. I want $500,000 in cash right now to settle this emotional trauma, or I swear I will tie you up in civil litigation until you are bankrupt and living on the streets." I looked at Malik standing there, his chest heaving with aggressive, volatile energy as he demanded $500,000 from me. The sheer blinding arrogance of his threat hung in the quiet conference room. I did not flinch. I did not cower. Instead, a sharp, unyielding laugh erupted from my chest. I laughed directly in his face. It was a cold, piercing sound that made my parents shift uncomfortably in their expensive leather chairs. "You want money for your family, Malik?" I asked, my voice dripping with absolute contempt. "You want to extort a grieving widow to protect your bloodline? You should probably make sure it is your family first." I reached into my leather bag and pulled out the second thick manila envelope. I tossed it onto the polished mahogany wood. It slid perfectly across the table, stopping right an inch from his clenched fist. "David," I said, not taking my eyes off my brother-in-law, "please introduce Defendant's Exhibit B for the official record." David leaned toward his microphone, his voice smooth and professional. Defendant's Exhibit B consists of 2 certified genetic profiles generated by an independent, accredited forensic laboratory. These profiles establish conclusive paternity testing regarding the minor child Leo. Brenda suddenly gasped, a sharp, highly panicked intake of air. She reached out, her manicured fingers clawing desperately at the envelope. "Do not open that!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with sheer terror. "Malik, do not let them do this. It is a trick. It is a setup." Malik ignored his wife's frantic pleading. His dark eyes were locked onto the sealed envelope. He grabbed it, tearing the paper flap open, and yanked out the thick stack of laboratory reports. He stared at the densely printed pages, his brow furrowing, as he tried to decipher the complex genetic markers. "Let me walk you through the science, Malik," I offered, standing up slowly from my chair to command the entire room. "Since your lawyer seems entirely paralyzed, I will summarize the findings. The first page confirms what we just proved with the medical records. The laboratory compared a sample of Leo's saliva to Ethan's residual medical DNA profile. The result is a 0% probability of paternity. Ethan is not the father." Malik gritted his teeth. "We already know you faked the medical records. This proves nothing." "Keep reading," I instructed coldly. "Turn to page 3. I did not just test the child against my dead husband. I had the laboratory run a secondary sequence. I had them test the saliva from Leo's pacifier against 3 coarse hairs I personally pulled from the shoulder of your custom suit jacket during the country club luncheon yesterday. The lab ran a direct comparative genetic sequence between you and the baby." Malik froze. The heavy paper shook in his massive hands. His eyes darted across the page, locking onto the bold, black text printed clearly at the bottom of the forensic report. "Leo is not Ethan's," I stated, my voice echoing off the thick glass walls of the high-end conference room, ensuring everyone heard my verdict clearly. "But he is not yours either, Malik. You are a complete 0% genetic match to the child. Brenda has been playing her own sick, twisted game this entire time." The room spiraled into absolute chaotic silence. Thomas and Patricia stared at Brenda in pure, unadulterated horror. Their perfect golden daughter was not just a liar. She was a spectacular, monumental fraud who had brought a stranger's baby into their pristine suburban world. Brenda slumped back in her chair, her face draining of all color. She clamped a hand over her mouth, her eyes darting wildly around the room for an escape route that simply did not exist. The court reporter's fingers flew across her machine, documenting every horrible second of their downfall. Malik slowly lowered the papers. His voice was dangerously quiet, a low, lethal rumble that shook the very foundations of the room. "Who is the father?" he demanded, staring blankly at the wall. "His name is Tyrone," I answered, dropping the final devastating piece of the puzzle directly onto the table. I pulled the geolocation data from Brenda's vehicle navigation system over the past 2 years. While you thought she was attending high-end charity luncheons, your wife was sneaking into a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. She was sleeping with Tyrone, the heavy-hitting enforcer for the exact underground gambling syndicate you currently owe $2 million to. Patricia let out a loud, strangled cry. "Gambling syndicate, $2 million. Malik, what is she talking about?" I ignored my mother completely, keeping my focus locked on the shattered man standing across from me. I watched the horrifying realization crash into Malik's brain like a runaway freight train. He thought he was the mastermind. He thought he was using my family's greed to save his own skin. He had absolutely no idea he was the ultimate pawn in Brenda's disgusting, treacherous game. "Brenda knew you were drowning in your illicit gambling debts," I explained, driving the final nail into their coffin. "She went to your violent loan shark to negotiate an extension, and she got pregnant. She used my dead husband as a convenient scapegoat to steal my house just to pay off the dangerous mobster she has been sleeping with behind your back." The golden couple's flawless facade violently shattered right in front of my parents. The illusion of their perfect, wealthy, successful life evaporated into thin air, leaving nothing but corruption, betrayal, and absolute ruin. Thomas grasped the edge of the mahogany table, looking physically ill. His prized daughter, the one he had relentlessly praised and funded, while treating me like garbage, had just exposed the family to a terrifying criminal underworld. Mr. Pierce quietly began packing his briefcase, desperate to flee before the police inevitably arrived. Malik's face contorted in pure, unadulterated rage. The veins in his neck bulged aggressively against his crisp shirt collar. The paper crushed inside his tightening fist. He turned his head slowly toward Brenda, who was deathly pale, shaking violently, and actively hyperventilating in her heavy leather chair as her entire world completely collapsed around her. Malik did not just yell, he erupted. With a guttural roar that shook the heavy glass walls of the conference room, he lunged across the narrow space, grabbing the solid wooden armrests of Brenda's chair and trapping her completely. His massive frame shadowed her, his face twisted into a mask of terrifying, unhinged fury. "You slept with Tyrone?" Malik screamed, his voice cracking with absolute hysteria. "You brought that psychopath into my life. Do you have any idea what you have done? I owe that man $2 million. The exact dollar amount hit the room like a physical shockwave. Thomas jolted backward in his leather chair, his eyes bulging in disbelief. Patricia gasped, her hands flying to her pearl necklace. The wealthy, charismatic entrepreneur they had proudly paraded around their exclusive country club friends was openly screaming about a multi-million-dollar mob debt in a downtown law office. Brenda shrank back into the upholstery, sobbing uncontrollably. The immaculate, victimized mother routine was completely gone. She was a cornered animal, frantically searching for an excuse to save her own skin. "I did it for us, Malik," she cried, her voice pitching into a desperate shriek. "I did it to save you. They were going to kill you. You were drowning. The bank sent the third foreclosure notice on our house. The leasing company was coming to repossess the cars. We had absolutely nothing left. I went to Tyrone to beg for an extension on your pathetic gambling debts. I was trying to buy you time." Thomas stood up his chair, scraping violently against the hardwood floor. His face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. "Foreclosure gambling debts," Thomas stammered, staring at his golden daughter as if she were a total stranger. "Brenda, what is he talking about? You told us Malik's tech startup was preparing for a public offering. You said you were buying a vacation home." "There is no startup, Dad," Brenda shrieked, the ugly, shameful truth finally ripping its way out of her throat. "There never was. He runs illegal sports books. He lost everything. We are entirely broke. We do not even have enough money to buy groceries. That is why we needed Nora's house. It was the only way to pay off the syndicate before they murdered us both." Patricia let out a high, wounded wail. The pristine, superior reality she had lorded over me my entire life shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Her perfect daughter was not a wealthy socialite. She was a broke, desperate criminal who had prostituted herself to a loan shark and tried to steal her widowed sister's home to cover up the mess. The humiliation was absolute, and it was happening on a recorded official legal transcript. "You disgusting, treacherous liar!" Malik roared, ignoring my parents completely. He slammed his fist down on the armrests again, leaning his face inches from Brenda's. "You let me raise that mobster's kid. You let me walk around thinking I had an heir while you were covering up your own sick betrayal. I will destroy you, Brenda. I will tear your entire life apart." Patricia could no longer bear the destruction of her golden child. She scrambled out of her chair and rushed around the mahogany table, positioning herself between Malik and her sobbing daughter. "Get away from her!" Patricia yelled, her voice trembling with misplaced maternal outrage. She reached out, placing her hands on Malik's broad chest to push him back. "Do not speak to my daughter that way. She was trying to fix your disgusting mistakes. Step back right now." Malik's eyes flashed with blind primal aggression. He did not care about Patricia's country club authority. He did not care about playing the respectful son-in-law anymore. He swept his arm out in a vicious, aggressive motion. He shoved Patricia hard in the chest. My mother stumbled backward, her heels catching on the thick carpet. She let out a sharp cry as she fell crashing hard onto the floor. Thomas froze, too cowardly and shocked by the sudden physical violence to actually step in and defend his wife. Mr. Pierce, the sleazy lawyer who thought this would be a simple extortion deposition, scrambled out of his seat and backed himself into the far corner of the room, looking frantically for the emergency exit. The chaos was perfect. It was a beautiful symphony of destruction. They were tearing each other apart, devouring their own toxic relationships exactly as I knew they would when the brutal truth finally cornered them. But I was not finished. The financial ruin, the cheating, the utter public humiliation, that was just the appetizer. I placed my hands flat on the polished mahogany table and pushed myself up. I stood tall, my posture radiating absolute lethal authority. The sheer commanding energy rolling off me forced the entire room to freeze. Malik snapped his head toward me, his chest still heaving with violent breaths. Brenda peered out from behind her trembling hands, her mascara smeared horribly down her cheeks. Thomas rushed to help Patricia up, but they both stopped dead staring at me in terrified, breathless silence. "You are angry about the cheating, Malik?" I asked, my voice cutting through the heavy, panicked air like a blade of solid ice. I reached into my leather bag for the final time today. "You are upset about the lies. Let us talk about the murder." I pulled the third thick manila envelope from my bag and threw it aggressively onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy, definitive slap, echoing like a gunshot in the tense, suffocating quiet of the corporate space. Right at that exact second, the heavy glass doors of the conference room swung violently open, shattering their final illusion. The heavy glass doors of the conference room swung violently open, shattering their final illusion. Detective Reed marched through the threshold with absolute authority. He did not look like a private investigator anymore. He looked like a man delivering a long overdue execution. Flanking him on either side were two broad-shouldered uniformed police officers. Their hands rested casually but purposefully near their duty belts. The air in the room instantly vanished. Malik completely froze, his massive frame locking into place as his eyes darted from the officers to the door. Brenda let out a sharp, strangled squeak, her hands flying to her throat as she pressed her back hard against her leather chair. Thomas and Patricia sat paralyzed on the floor where Patricia had fallen, their mouths hanging open in sheer, unadulterated terror. Mr. Pierce, the sleazy lawyer who had been so arrogant just moments ago, pressed himself entirely flat against the far wall, trying to become invisible. "Nobody moves a single muscle," one of the uniformed officers commanded. His voice was a booming echo that demanded absolute compliance. Detective Reed stepped forward and gave me a single confirming nod. I picked up the digital audio recorder I had kept hidden in my pocket since the kitchen break-in. I placed it squarely in the center of the polished mahogany table right next to the microphone of the court reporter. The woman was staring at the police, her hands trembling over her keys, unsure if she should keep working. "Keep typing," I instructed the court reporter, my voice calm and deadly. "I want every single second of this documented on the official legal transcript." I pressed the play button on the digital device. The high-definition audio filled the silent conference room. The sound of shattered wood and cold wind played first, followed immediately by Malik's deep, aggressive voice. The recording captured him bragging about manipulating my parents. It captured him calling Thomas and Patricia the easiest marks he had ever played, mocking their desperation to maintain a perfect suburban image. I watched my father's face contort with a mixture of absolute shame and blinding anger as he heard his beloved son-in-law describe him as a pathetic, gullible pawn. But the true horror came seconds later. Malik's recorded voice dropped to a lethal whisper. Ethan thought he was a hero. He found out about my business. He found out about the money I owed the syndicate. He actually looked me in the eye in a parking garage and told me he was going to the police to turn me in. Patricia let out a horrified gasp, clutching my father's arm with white knuckles. Brenda stopped breathing entirely, her eyes wide with panic. The recording continued, Malik's arrogant sneer audible even through the small speaker. But cars are very complicated machines, Nora. If a person is not careful, things can break down at the worst possible moments. If the brake lines happen to fail when a driver really needs them to work well, that is just a tragic, unavoidable accident. The police wrap it up in a neat little bow, the widow cries at the funeral, and the problem goes away permanently. I pressed stop. The silence that followed was heavier than concrete. Patricia buried her face in her hands, letting out a loud, agonizing wail. She realized in that exact moment that she had been actively defending the man who brutally murdered her son-in-law. Thomas looked physically ill. His skin turned a sickening shade of gray as he stared at Malik, the man he had welcomed into his home and treated like a king. "You killed him," Thomas whispered, his voice cracking with pure shock. "You actually murdered Ethan." "He did," I confirmed, standing tall over the table, refusing to break eye contact with the monster who ruined my life. I reached into the third envelope and pulled out a stack of glossy photographs and official forensic reports. I threw them down in front of Mr. Pierce and the court reporter. Detective Reed went to the municipal impound lot the morning after the crash. He inspected the wreckage of my husband's car before the insurance company could crush the evidence. Those are the forensic photographs of the brake lines. They were not ruptured by the impact of the collision. They were cleanly and intentionally severed with a heavy wire cutter. Malik stared at the photographs scattered across the wood, his chest heaving rapidly. The absolute arrogance that had fueled him for months was completely gone. In its place was the frantic, wide-eyed panic of a cornered predator. He looked at the uniformed officers blocking the only exit, then looked back at me, his jaw clenching in silent fury. "Let us put the entire disgusting plot on the official legal record," I announced, making sure my voice carried clearly over Patricia's sobbing. Malik murdered Ethan to stop him from exposing a $2 million gambling debt to a violent underground syndicate. Brenda, terrified of losing her wealthy lifestyle and desperate to save her husband from the mob, forged a will. She fabricated a vile story about an affair and used a loan shark's baby to steal my fully paid-off $900,000 house. They planned to sell my property, pay off the criminals, and walk away clean while I was left homeless and grieving. I pointed a finger directly at Malik, channeling all the pain and rage of the last few months into one final strike. "You thought I was just a weak, broken widow. You thought you could terrorize me in my own kitchen, and I would just roll over and surrender my life to you. You thought you could erase Ethan and steal everything we built. You were dead wrong." Malik's eyes darted wildly around the room. He realized his entire life was over. The syndicate would kill him if the debt remained unpaid, but the police were going to lock him in a cage for the rest of his natural life. The walls were closing in rapidly, and survival instinct completely took over his logic. With a sudden, explosive roar, Malik shoved the heavy mahogany table forward. The wood screeched violently against the floor, knocking my parents backward and pinning Mr. Pierce against the glass wall. Malik lunged toward the gap, abandoning his wife, abandoning his fake child, and sprinting desperately for the conference room doors. He did not make it 3 steps. The 2 uniformed officers reacted with lightning speed. The officer on the left stepped directly into Malik's path, driving his shoulder hard into Malik's chest. The impact halted his momentum, instantly knocking the wind out of him. The second officer grabbed Malik's thick arm, twisting it violently behind his back. Together they tackled the massive man to the floor. The heavy thud of Malik's body hitting the polished hardwood shook the entire room. Malik thrashed and shouted, kicking his legs wildly as he tried to break free. But the officers pinned him down with sheer, relentless force. One officer pressed a knee firmly into the center of Malik's back, pulling his other arm around. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs snapping securely around his wrists echoed through the room, sealing his fate forever. Brenda stared at her husband writhing on the floor before her survival instinct kicked in. The grieving widow facade vanished, replaced by the panicked shrieks of a cornered criminal. She pointed at Malik. "He forced me," Brenda screamed, her voice echoing shrilly. "I had nothing to do with the car crash. I did not know he severed the brake lines. Malik threatened to kill me if I did not help him steal the house. He made me forge the will. He said he would let the loan sharks take my baby if I did not do exactly what he commanded." Malik stopped thrashing. He pressed his cheek against the hardwood floor to glare up at his wife. The venomous hatred burning in his dark eyes was utterly terrifying. "You lying snake!" Malik roared, struggling against the cuffs binding his wrists. "You brought a mobster's bastard into my house and played me for a fool. You drafted that fake will yourself. You wanted Nora's house to maintain your pathetic housewife illusion." "I am a victim," Brenda sobbed, looking wildly between Detective Reed and the court reporter. "He is a violent monster. He abused me. He manipulated my fear. You have to believe me. I just wanted to protect my innocent child." Reed did not even blink. He pulled out a folded warrant. "Save the performance," Reed stated, his voice an uncompromising wall of authority. "We have geolocation data proving you willingly met with syndicate enforcers. We have the digital footprint from your laptop showing you actively researched how to bypass probate court using forged documents. You were not a hostage, Brenda. You were the primary architect." Reed gave a curt nod to the second police officer. The officer stepped forward, grabbing Brenda by the arm and yanking her firmly out of the leather chair. "No, stop!" Brenda shrieked, kicking her expensive heels against the table leg. "You cannot arrest me. I am a mother. Mom, Dad, do something. Do not let them take me." The officer swiftly pulled her arms behind her back. The second set of handcuffs ratcheted tightly around her wrists. The sharp sound was beautiful music. The officer began reading her Miranda rights in a calm, practiced drone, listing the felony charges of fraud, perjury, and criminal conspiracy. Brenda thrashed against the officer's grip, her flawless hair falling into a messy wreck across her tear-stained face. The officers hauled Malik up from the floor by his biceps. The imposing tailored suit he wore was ruined, covered in floor dust. The charismatic businessman was gone, leaving only a desperate, exposed murderer. "Move," the officer commanded, shoving Malik toward the heavy mahogany doors. They marched the golden couple out of the high-end conference room. Brenda wailed the entire way down the corridor, her hysterical sobs echoing through the law firm lobby, ensuring every single paralegal and corporate partner witnessed her humiliating arrest. The heavy glass doors swung shut, leaving a suffocating silence. I turned my attention to the opposite side of the table. Thomas and Patricia were completely destroyed. My father slumped back into his chair, his shoulders caving inward. He stared blankly at the empty doorway, his chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. My mother remained on the floor where Malik had shoved her. Her hands trembled violently in her lap. Their entire reality had just been decimated. For 34 years, they had worshipped Brenda. They funded her failures, covered up her thefts, and celebrated her mediocrity. They proudly enabled a woman who brought a violent loan shark's baby into their bloodline and conspired to steal a grieving widow's home. They realized in real time that their pristine, heavily guarded country club reputation was dead. Tomorrow morning, the local news would broadcast their favorite daughter's mugshot, alongside a spectacular tale of mob deaths, illicit infidelity, and premeditated murder. Their social status, their profound pride, and their absolute arrogance were completely incinerated. "Mr. Pierce," Their sleazy attorney quietly zipped his briefcase and bolted from the room without uttering a single word, abandoning his disgraced clients. David quietly closed his legal pad, signaling the deposition was officially over. I stood up from my chair, buttoning my charcoal suit jacket. I looked down at the two people who had spent my entire life making me feel utterly worthless and unlovable. I felt no pity. I felt absolutely nothing but cold, victorious clarity. Patricia slowly raised her head from the floor. Her mascara was smeared into dark, ugly circles around her swollen eyes. She looked at me, taking in my pristine suit, my calm demeanor, and the absolute power radiating from my stance. Her mind frantically calculated her remaining options. Her golden daughter was heading to a federal prison. Her son-in-law was a murderer. The community was going to exile her. She had absolutely nothing left except for the daughter she had spent decades trying to destroy. With a pathetic, trembling gasp, Patricia dragged herself across the carpet. She crawled toward me, her designer dress bunching around her knees. She stopped right at the tips of my leather shoes. My mother let out a loud, agonizing sob and violently threw her upper body forward, collapsing completely onto her knees in front of me. She reached out with shaking, manicured hands, grabbing the fabric of my trousers as if I were a life raft. "Nora, please," Patricia wailed, her voice cracking with sheer, desperate manipulation. "Please forgive us. We had no idea. We were completely blinded. Malik manipulated us. He used our love for Leo to twist our minds. We never wanted to hurt you. You are our smart, successful daughter." She dug her nails into my pant leg, looking up at me with a face contorted in desperate, groveling agony. "You have to help us navigate this nightmare," Patricia begged, her voice echoing off the cold glass walls. "Please, do not turn your back on us now. You are our only family left." I looked down at the woman gripping my trousers. Patricia was weeping, her tears staining the fabric of my suit, her entire body shaking with the violent tremors of a collapsed reality. Thomas remained frozen in his chair, a hollow, pathetic shell of the authoritarian patriarch who had barged into my home just days ago, demanding my complete surrender. They expected me to bend. They expected the lifetime of conditioning, the decades of being trained, to crave their approval, to suddenly kick in and make me kneel beside them to offer comfort. For 34 years, I had been the designated shock absorber for this family, the one expected to swallow my pride and fix the messes they created. I did not move a single inch. I stood perfectly rigid, my face a mask of absolute glacial indifference. I reached down, grabbed Patricia by the wrists, and forcefully peeled her manicured fingers off my clothing. I dropped her hands back into her lap and took a deliberate step backward, severing the physical connection completely. "I am not your family," I stated, my voice echoing with a lethal, hollow calm that made Thomas flinch. "And you were never manipulated. Do not dare insult my intelligence by playing the victim now that your golden child is sitting in the back of a police cruiser in handcuffs. You knew exactly what you were doing." Patricia gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. "Nora, no. Malik lied to us. Brenda lied to us. We thought Ethan had betrayed her. We thought we were protecting an innocent baby who shared your husband's blood." "You thought you finally had the ultimate excuse to destroy me," I corrected her, my voice rising in volume, dominating the silent conference room. "You were not protecting a baby. You were punishing me. You have spent 34 years resenting me because I refused to be a dependent, compliant prop in your perfect suburban fantasy. You hated that I built a successful consulting firm. You hated that Ethan and I built a quiet, stable life without asking you for a single dime. You adored Brenda because her constant failures made you feel powerful. You loved bailing her out because it kept her firmly under your thumb. And when she told you the most vile, disgusting lie imaginable about my dead husband, you did not question it for a single second. You celebrated it." Thomas finally found his voice a weak, trembling croak. "We are your parents. We made a terrible mistake, but we were just trying to save the family reputation from a public scandal." I turned my gaze onto my father, pinning him to his chair. "You marched into my house while I was mourning my murdered husband. You stood in my foyer and demanded I sell my $900,000 home. You demanded I hand the profits over to a criminal, and you demanded I apologize to the man who severed Ethan's brake lines. You did not just blindly believe Brenda. You actively maliciously conspired to render me completely homeless out of pure spite. You wanted to see me broken and destitute on the street just so you could maintain your pathetic status at the country club. You wanted me to lose everything. Patricia let out a loud, agonizing wail, burying her face in her hands. We did not know about the murder. We did not know about the illegal gambling debts. Please, Nora, you have to believe us. Ignorance is not an excuse for cruelty. I fired back, stepping closer to them, forcing them to hear every single word of their own indictment. You welcomed Malik with open arms because his tailored suits and leased luxury cars looked good in your family photos. You sneered at Ethan because he was a quiet, honest man who saw right through your toxic narcissism. Ethan protected me from you. He built a fortress around me. And the moment he was killed, you descended on me like vultures trying to pick my bones clean. I paused, letting the heavy, suffocating silence of the room press down on their shoulders. I looked at the scattered forensic documents, the DNA results, the fraudulent will lying discarded on the mahogany table. It was the physical wreckage of their profound arrogance. You enabled a monster. I told them, my voice dropping to a sharp, unforgiving whisper. You funded Brenda's delusions for decades. You covered up her theft of my college savings. You praised her mediocrity and weaponized her against me. You created the exact environment that allowed her to bring a violent loan shark's baby into this world and attempt to steal my entire life to cover it up. You did this. You built this nightmare with your own two hands, and now you are going to live in it. David silently unzipped his leather briefcase and pulled out a crisp white legal folder. He handed it to me without a word. I took the folder and dropped it directly onto the floor, right between Patricia's trembling knees. What is this? Thomas stammered, staring at the folder, as if it were a live bomb ready to detonate. That is a legally binding cease and desist order. I explained, my tone strictly professional, entirely devoid of any familial warmth. It has been drafted by my legal counsel and officially signed by a judge. It mandates that neither of you are permitted to contact me by phone, email, or physical mail. You are legally barred from coming within 500 feet of my residence or my place of business. If you attempt to show up at my house again, if you try to call me to cry about the media fallout, or if you ever speak my name in public to garner sympathy, I will have you both arrested for criminal harassment without hesitation. Patricia stared at the legal document on the floor, her eyes wide with total, unadulterated devastation. Her breathing became shallow and erratic. Nora, you cannot do this to us. We have lawyers to pay now. Brenda needs a criminal defense team. The press is going to hound us relentlessly. We have absolutely nobody else. We need our daughter. I looked down at the weeping, broken woman who had spent my entire existence making me feel entirely worthless. I felt no pity. I felt no obligation. I felt nothing but absolute liberating closure finally settling into my bones. The chains of guilt they had wrapped around me were completely severed. You have no daughters left, I said. I turned my back on them. I did not look back at Thomas shrinking into his chair. I did not look back at Patricia sobbing uncontrollably on the carpet. I walked toward the heavy glass doors of the conference room, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. David followed right behind me, pulling the doors wide open. I walked out of the room, out of their lives, leaving my parents entirely alone on the floor, drowning in the scattered damning documents of their own destruction. 6 months passed. The transition from the freezing, bitter winter to a bright, vibrant Chicago summer perfectly mirrored the absolute transformation of my reality. The final gavel fell in the federal courthouse on a Tuesday morning, cementing the absolute destruction of the people who tried to ruin me. I sat in the front row of the gallery, flanked by David and Detective Reed, watching the criminal justice system systematically dismantle my former family. Malik stood before the judge, wearing a bright orange jumpsuit, his imposing physical presence reduced to a hollow, shaking shell. The prosecution had built an impenetrable case using the severed brake lines, the financial records of the underground syndicate, and the crystal-clear audio recording of his arrogant confession in my kitchen. The judge did not show a single ounce of leniency. Malik was sentenced to life in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole for the premeditated murder of my husband. He did not look back at the gallery as the heavy doors swung shut and the bailiffs hauled him away in heavy iron chains. He knew his life was entirely over, trapped in a cage of his own making, forever haunted by his catastrophic greed. Brenda received her own devastating dose of reality just hours later in a separate courtroom down the hall. The golden child who had spent 34 years failing upward on my parents' dime finally faced a catastrophic problem they could not buy her way out of. She was convicted of multiple felony charges, including aggravated fraud, perjury, and criminal conspiracy. The judge explicitly cited her vile attempt to weaponize a fraudulent paternity claim against a grieving widow as grounds for a maximum sentence. She was handed 15 rigorous years behind bars. She sobbed hysterically as the sentence was read, screaming wildly for our parents to save her, but her pathetic pleas echoed off the cold, hard walls of the courtroom, completely unanswered. The loan shark's baby was placed into the state foster care system, entirely removed from the toxic criminal environment Brenda had created. Her perfect suburban illusion was permanently eradicated, replaced by a tiny, concrete cell where she would spend the rest of her youth. She would trade her designer dresses for standard-issue prison uniforms, finally forced to face the harsh consequences she had dodged her entire life. Thomas and Patricia narrowly avoided federal prison, but their brutal, deeply humiliating cosmic sentence was arguably much worse than actually sitting behind cold iron bars. Local media outlets had an absolute relentless field day with the wealthy, arrogant suburban family caught in a web of mob debts, illicit infidelity, and murder. Their faces were splashed across every television screen. The elite country club immediately revoked their membership, sending a highly public notice of expulsion. Their wealthy friends completely severed all ties, changing phone numbers and refusing to be associated with accomplices to a murder plot. Thomas lost his lucrative position at his firm, his business partners aggressively pushing him into an early, disgraced retirement to save the company's reputation. They were forced to sell their sprawling estate at a massive loss, just to cover the crippling legal fees from Brenda's futile defense. They moved into a tiny, run-down apartment on the outskirts of the city, completely isolated, deeply in debt, and entirely stripped of the social status they worshipped above all else. They were completely ostracized, treated as invisible, toxic ghosts in their own community. They had deliberately destroyed their only loyal daughter, and the devastating heavy karma they earned would follow them to their graves. With the criminal trials fully concluded and the fraudulent will officially destroyed, the probate court moved swiftly. The corrupt judge who had initially granted the injunction against me was placed under a severe federal investigation, and my assets were fully, unconditionally unfrozen. The restrictive legal lien on my property was lifted immediately. I stood in the center of the $900,000 house Ethan and I had built together. It was completely empty now, the boxes packed and the furniture cleared out. It held beautiful, loving memories, but it also held the traumatic echoes of a violent home invasion and Malik's terrifying threats. I did not want to live in a museum of my past. I listed the property on the market, and it sold well above asking price within a single week in a competitive cash offer. I signed the closing documents with a genuinely light heart, officially releasing the very final physical anchor tying me to that dark, painful chapter. I directly deposited the massive check into my newly restored bank account, securing my absolute financial independence forever. I used the newly acquired capital to directly fund my own independent corporate strategy firm. I leased a gorgeous high-rise office space right in the heart of downtown Chicago, surrounded by towering glass and steel that overlooked the entire city. I did not have to answer to toxic family members anymore. I did not have to hide my success to protect their fragile egos. I hired my own brilliant team and secured 3 massive, highly lucrative corporate clients in the very first month alone. I was thriving, wildly successful, and for the first time in my entire existence, I was completely and truly at peace. The sun began to set over the city, casting a warm golden glow across my polished mahogany desk. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window holding a framed photograph of Ethan in my steady hands. I traced his smiling face with my thumb, feeling a profound wave of gratitude. He had protected me from them in life, and his final warning had saved me in death. I looked out over the sprawling, breathtaking Chicago skyline, taking a long, deep breath of freedom, feeling the absolute unstoppable power of a woman who had walked through pure hell and emerged totally victorious. I had exacted the ultimate orchestrated sweet revenge, and my beautiful new life was finally just beginning. True family is defined by mutual respect and unyielding loyalty, not merely by shared bloodlines. Nora's harrowing journey teaches us that when toxic relatives weaponize your grief or manipulate your loyalty, walking away is never a sign of weakness. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you, and you owe absolutely nothing to people who only value you when you are suffering. By reclaiming her truth and refusing to remain a victim, Nora proves that our darkest betrayals can become the very foundation for our greatest, most independent triumphs. Have you ever had to draw a hard boundary to protect your own peace from a toxic family dynamic? Share your story in the comments below to remind others they are never alone in this fight. If Nora's journey resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe for more empowering stories of resilience, ultimate justice, and women reclaiming their power.